Imagine falling asleep without the weight of the day on your chest. No spinning thoughts, no need to fix what already happened. Just peace, real peace, built from the inside out. But be honest. How many nights have you spent trapped in your mind, replaying conversations, worrying about things that are already gone, trying to control what was never yours to hold? The way you let go at night defines the life you wake up to. If you fall asleep with acceptance, with calm, with the right teachings, you'll feel lighter, clearer, more connected to what really matters. But if you fall asleep in resistance, trying to control the uncontrollable, then you carry that struggle into tomorrow before it even begins. Tonight, you're going to learn how to release, not by force, not by pretending everything is fine, but by understanding what Buddhist wisdom has been trying to teach for centuries. Peace does not come from control, it comes from letting go. These aren't just gentle words to help you sleep, they are life-changing tools, ancient truths to free your mind, calm your emotions, and guide your soul. So, before we start, I want you to make a quiet promise to yourself. Say it softly, or write it in the comments if you're listening online. Starting tonight, I release what I cannot control. I choose peace. You're not just saying words, you're setting yourself free. The more you repeat this, the more your nervous system will remember what peace feels like. And the easier it becomes to return to it, again and again. Say it now, then get comfortable, because tonight, your mind finally rests. Let's begin. And now that the intention has been set, something deeper begins. Tonight is no longer about escaping your thoughts. It's about releasing the weight that was never meant to be carried in the first place. Starting with the most common but invisible burden of all, the emotions of others. Because so many people go to sleep tired, not from their own battles, but from carrying the storms of everyone around them. This is where the unburdening begins. There's a quiet kind of suffering that rarely gets acknowledged. It's not dramatic. It doesn't cry out loud, but it shows up in the tightening of your chest when someone around you is upset. It appears in the urge to fix, to smooth, to silence your own needs so someone else doesn't fall apart. It's when peace becomes a performance and your role is to hold the sky steady so others don't feel the rain. And the cost? Your own emotional freedom. This is what Buddhist wisdom helps unravel. The false belief that compassion means control, that to care one must carry. But real compassion doesn't come with shackles, it comes with boundaries. And tonight, it begins with understanding that love is not measured by how much pain is absorbed. It's measured by how free both people feel in each other's presence. The teachings show that every being carries their own karma, their own lessons, path, and emotional weather. No matter how close someone is, their pain is still their own to feel, to face, and to learn from. Trying to take it away not only steals their growth, but exhausts your soul in the process. The cloud can offer shade, but it was never meant to carry the entire sky. It starts with awareness. That subtle shift inside when you realize you've stepped over the line. When you stop listening and start fixing. When you're no longer responding from your heart, but reacting from your fear of their discomfort. That's the moment the balance tips, and your compassion quietly turns into control. Many people think they're helping by holding others' emotions, but help that drains your peace isn't help, it's entanglement. And Buddhism teaches that the most powerful help you can offer is presence, not pressure. To sit beside someone in their storm without becoming the storm. To hold space, not responsibility. Because emotional boundaries don't disconnect people. They protect the truth of connection. They say, "I'm with you," without saying, "Let me live this for you." It's a quiet power, one that knows when to speak and when to stay silent, one that stops needing to be the rescuer in every room. Because needing to rescue often hides a deeper wound, the fear of being unneeded. But when compassion is real, it doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need to be loud. It trusts the process of others. It understands that pain isn't always a problem, it's a teacher, and that means letting others learn. Buddhism doesn't tell you to stop caring. It shows you how to care without losing yourself. That's why the breath matters so much in Buddhist practice. It brings you back to center. When someone is hurting and you start to feel overwhelmed, the breath reminds you, this emotion is not mine. This pain is passing through, but it doesn't have to pass into me. Inhale, exhale, stay with yourself, even as you stay with them. And what about guilt? That creeping voice that says, if you don't make them feel better, you're failing. Buddhist wisdom meets that voice with clarity. It teaches that guilt is not always a sign of doing wrong. Sometimes it's just the echo of old conditioning. The idea that love equals sacrifice. That to be good, you must always be the strong one. But that's not balance. That's imbalance disguised as virtue. To release this pattern, the mind must be retrained, not through force, but through recognition. Every time you feel that urge to fix someone's mood, pause, ask, is this mine to hold? And if the answer is no, then let the emotion rise and fall without attaching to it. You are not their anchor. You are your own. The more this practice repeats, the more natural it becomes, like a muscle that remembers how to move freely once the tension has been released. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you stop needing to be the emotional center for everyone else. Suddenly, your nervous system relaxes, your sleep deepens, your relationships become more honest. Because when you stop absorbing what isn't yours, people can finally meet the real you, not the version you've been performing to make others feel safe. This is the hidden wisdom of non-attachment. Not coldness, not apathy, but clarity. The clarity to say, I love you, and I trust you to feel your feelings. I will not take them from you, because they are sacred, because you are strong, because I believe in your path. That kind of love is rare. It's not always appreciated in the moment. Some may want you to carry their weight. Some may resent your boundaries. But the Dharma reminds us, holding space is more powerful than holding suffering. And in time, those who are ready will feel the difference. They'll feel your calm, your stability, your trust, and they'll begin to trust themselves too. Buddhist monks practice this through equanimity, the ability to stay rooted in compassion without getting swept away. They chant phrases like, all beings are the owners of their actions. This isn't detachment from humanity. It's respect for each person's inner teacher, a reminder that growth isn't something you can give. It's something only the soul can earn, one moment at a time. And what about those you love most? Family, partners, children. That's where this teaching gets tested the most. But even there, the same truth applies. Love that tries to control, even gently, is love that fears, love that lets go with trust and presence, is love that heals. Think of a tree. The roots go deep, but the branches move with the wind. You can be steady in your care without becoming rigid in your need to manage others' feelings. You can offer shade without blocking the sun. You can support others without replacing their foundation with yours. There's a line in the Dhammapada that says, "Let go of the past, let go of the future, let go of the present. With a heart free of all grasping, you shall find peace." It sounds extreme, but the heart of it is simple. Let go of what you can't control. And other people's emotions, that's at the top of that list. The mind may resist this at first. It will tell stories. But they need me, but they'll fall apart. But if I don't step in, who will? These are not the voice of love. They're the voice of fear wearing love's costume. Love doesn't say, "You're helpless without me." Love says, "You've got this. I'm here, but you've got this." You are not required to fix sadness that is not yours. You are not responsible for healing anger that does not come from you. You are allowed to be kind without becoming depleted. That is the Dharma of emotional sovereignty. And in this letting go, you make room for something far more beautiful. Respect. Real, soul-deep respect. The kind that says, "I honor your experience, and I won't interrupt your journey just to make myself more comfortable." This kind of respect changes everything. It changes how you show up. It changes how others feel around you, because they sense it. Your presence isn't heavy, it's light. It doesn't demand anything, it just is, calm, rooted, open. And that kind of presence, it's unforgettable. So tonight, as you rest, let this be your mantra. Their feelings are not my responsibility. My peace is not a sacrifice. I can love without carrying. I can care without control. You may feel resistance. You may feel guilt. But with each breath, let those feelings rise and fall like waves. You are not here to stop the storm. You are here to be the stillness underneath it. Sleep will come easier when the weight is gone. And when you wake up, the world may look the same, but something inside will have shifted. A quiet strength, a calm knowing, a lightness that stays with you long after the dream ends. And once you stop holding what was never yours to hold, something unexpected appears in the space that remains. Stillness, not silence from the outside, but a silence from deep within. The kind that doesn't beg for peace, but already is peace. Because when you no longer absorb the chaos of others, you're left with a truth that is even harder to face, the chaos within yourself. That's where the real practice begins, not in detaching from others, but in learning to stay grounded when your own mind begins to shake. This is where still water becomes your teacher. There's a surface to every life. That outer layer that gets hit first, when the winds of stress, loss, change, or uncertainty begin to blow. Most people live on this surface, reacting, repeating, spinning with the storm and calling it living. But deep below that surface is another place, a quiet depth that never stirs, no matter how wild things get above. And the goal is not to escape the waves, it's to drop anchor in that depth and learn to live from it. Meditation in Buddhism isn't an escape. It's not a time out from real life. It's the training ground for stability. The place where you slowly, steadily Return to the center of yourself, not by fighting the noise, but by no longer clinging to it. You sit, you breathe. Thoughts rise, thoughts fall, and in the beginning, it feels like failure, because the mind will scream, it will judge, it will pull you in every direction. But the practice is not about silence, it's about not following the noise. Every breath becomes an anchor, a reminder that your mind can move, but you don't have to move with it, that your thoughts can spin, but you can still remain. And the longer you sit, the more you realize, most of what disturbed you wasn't the world, it was your reaction to it. In the Dhamma, this stillness is called samatha, a calming of the mental waters. But it's not forced. You can't grip your way into stillness. You relax into it, gently, patiently. The more you push for calm, the more it runs from you. But the moment you stop demanding peace and simply allow space for what is, the surface begins to settle. Thoughts are not the enemy. Emotions are not the enemy. Even pain is not the enemy. The only enemy, if there is one, is forgetting that you are more than all of those things. Meditation doesn't stop the storm. It teaches you how to sit in the center of it and not be moved. The Buddha once spoke of a mind like a lake. When the water is agitated, it reflects nothing clearly. But when it is still, everything becomes visible. Not because the world changes, but because your vision finally sharpens. That's what meditative stillness does. It gives you back your clarity. It shows you what's real and what's just the storm of conditioned thought. But stillness doesn't mean inactivity. It doesn't mean doing nothing or becoming numb. It means acting from a deeper place, a place not touched by fear or urgency. From this state, even the hardest choices can be made with grace, because you are no longer choosing from panic, you're choosing from presence. To train this, consistency matters more than intensity. You don't need to sit for hours. What you need is to return again and again to your breath. Even 5 minutes with full attention becomes sacred. The breath becomes the bridge between the body and the mind. It grounds the nervous system. It slows the spinning. It opens the space between impulse and response. And in that space, you find your power. Some days the storm will be louder. Thoughts will be faster. Old wounds will rise. But every storm is a test of where you've placed your anchor. If it's tied to outcomes, opinions, or ego, you'll be dragged. But if it's tied to the breath, to presence, to awareness itself, you stay. This is the practice of non-reactivity, and it's not passive. It's one of the strongest disciplines a human can develop, because the world will provoke you. People will misunderstand you. Life will shake you. But you don't have to shake. That choice is always yours. Stillness is the proof that your peace is not conditional. Many people hear non-reactive and think it means cold, but it's the opposite. The non-reactive person feels fully. They just don't get lost in the feeling. They witness the anger without becoming it. They notice the fear, but don't let it steer. They observe the urge to react, and in that pause, they choose peace over pattern. Meditation sharpens this ability. Like training a muscle you didn't know you had. The first time you sit and breathe, it might feel like nothing's happening. But it is. Slowly, your nervous system begins to unlearn the habit of panic. Slowly, your thoughts lose their grip on your identity. And slowly, your soul remembers what stillness feels like when it is no longer trying to control everything. Stillness isn't detachment from life. It's meeting life fully, without the inner resistance. You feel the sadness, but you don't sink. You feel the fear, but you don't run. You feel the joy, but you don't cling. Everything is allowed to come and go, like weather, like waves, like breath. And sometimes stillness isn't about the mind at all. It starts in the body. The body that holds tension like a second skin, that clenches in old defense even when no threat is near. Meditation is also a return to the body, a chance to feel what has been stored there. And when you breathe into those spaces, not trying to fix, just to feel, something begins to loosen. The storm inside starts to pass, and in that space, your true presence returns. There is a peace that no external event can touch. That's what Buddhist practice protects. It's not dependent on quiet surroundings or perfect conditions. It's the kind of peace that stays when plans fail, when people leave, when the world goes silent. A peace that lives in the breath, not in the outcome. The goal isn't to become some emotionless statue. It's to feel everything and still remain centered, to experience every high and low and still know where home is inside you, to return again and again to the breath, not because it's an escape, but because it's the only place life actually happens. Everything else is memory or projection. Even the Buddha was tempted by storms. Mara, the tempter, the inner voice of distraction and fear, visited him many times. But he didn't fight Mara. He sat with him. He said, "I see you, Mara." And in that recognition, without resistance, the storm passed. This is the teaching. What you fight owns you. What you allow loses its grip. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the absence of being moved by things that do not matter. It's the strength to feel deeply without being broken. It's the softness that doesn't bend to fear. And once it's cultivated, it becomes your shield, not from life, but from the illusion that you need to control life. This is why stillness is taught before wisdom, because without it, the mind can't see clearly. Without it, emotion distorts perception. But with stillness, even chaos becomes a teacher. Even suffering becomes sacred. So the practice continues. One breath, one moment, over and over. No need for perfection, no need to achieve anything, just be. Let the thoughts come, let them go. Don't follow, don't resist. Sit like still water beneath the storm, and when the day ends, when the world quiets, return again. Not to change your life, but to meet it fully, to anchor in something deeper than thought, to remember that no matter how loud the world gets, the true refuge is not out there, it's already inside you, waiting. Let the surface do what it does. The storm can swirl, the clouds can gather, but your breath remains, your awareness remains, your presence, soft and steady, is still here. That's all you need, and that is everything. And once the storm is no longer feared, once stillness becomes familiar, something else becomes clear. The fear was never just about chaos. It was about control. Deep down, the real discomfort was never the noise. It was the idea that life might not go the way you wanted, that outcomes might slip away, that plans might collapse, and so the mind clings, not because it's strong, but because it's scared. This is where we shift from calming the waves to letting go of the need to direct the current. Because peace is not just staying still in the storm, it's releasing the thread that ties your happiness to how things turn out. There is a moment in every life that feels like a breaking. A job is lost, a dream crumbles, a relationship ends, and in that instant, something snaps. The mind rushes to label it failure, rejection, defeat. But what if those moments were not the end of something valuable, but the release from something that was already holding you back? What if the thread that broke was never really keeping you safe, but keeping you stuck? This is the heart of non-attachment, not pushing life away, not becoming indifferent, but loosening the grip. Understanding that chasing specific outcomes often binds you to suffering you don't even recognize. Buddhism teaches this gently but firmly. It is your attachment, not the object of your desire, that causes pain. It starts early. The belief that success means control, that happiness depends on things going according to plan. And so the thread gets tighter. Expectations wrap around the heart like rope. I'll be okay if I get this promotion. I'll feel loved if they stay. I'll feel worthy if I succeed. But then the world does what the world always does. It changes. And when the thread snaps, the pain feels unbearable. But pause. Breathe. Look again. That breaking wasn't the end of your peace. It was the beginning of your freedom. The kite does not fall when the thread snaps. It rises. Because it was never the thread that gave it flight. It was the wind. And the wind, like life, cannot be controlled. But it can carry you somewhere new if you're willing to let go. Non-attachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop depending. You can still love deeply, try bravely, dream boldly. But you don't tie your identity to the result. You pour your heart into the moment, and then you let it go. You do the work, but release the outcome. You show up fully, but let life meet you how it chooses. This is not weakness. This is strength without strain. A kind of inner softness that cannot be broken because it's not holding on in the first place. Buddhist wisdom calls this upadana, grasping. It's the mind's habit of clinging to what it believes it needs to survive, and that includes praise, status, certainty. But the more you grasp, the more your identity shrinks around the thing you're trying to control, and the more afraid you become of losing it. But when the thread snaps, when the relationship ends, the plan collapses, the door closes. That's the opening. Not into despair, but into space. Because in the emptiness that follows, something deeper begins to stir. You start to notice the part of you that isn't tied to success, that isn't shattered by rejection, that doesn't disappear when things don't go your way. That part is the sky. Everything else was just a passing cloud. Failure becomes a gift when you stop defining yourself by outcomes, because when something you planned falls apart, it reveals everything you hadn't yet seen. It reveals attachments you didn't know you had. It shows you the difference between effort and control, and it gives you the opportunity to begin again, not from the same place, but from a deeper one. The Buddha taught that expectations are like strings. They stretch across the mind, tying your peace to the world's unpredictability. But when you begin to cut those strings, not by force, but by insight, your peace returns home. Not because the world changed, but because you stopped asking it to make you feel whole. Non-attachment is not resignation. It's participation without possession. It's saying, I give myself fully to this moment, and meaning it, even if the result breaks your heart. Because when you stop attaching your worth to outcomes, your heart doesn't break the same way anymore. It opens. And yes, there will still be pain. Letting go does not erase grief. But grief without attachment moves. It breathes. It heals. It teaches. While attachment freezes time, it creates stories like, this shouldn't have happened, and those stories become cages. But when you stop demanding that things last forever, everything becomes more beautiful. The love, the effort, the risk, it all becomes sacred, because you're not clinging to the result. You're honoring the moment. You're living, not bargaining with life for guarantees. This is why so many people feel lost after success. They got what they wanted, but the thread was too tight. They became their achievement. And when the applause faded, they didn't know who they were anymore. But the one who lives without attachment never loses themselves, because their peace was never borrowed. It was built. It's a different way of living. You start to ask better questions. Not, will this work out exactly how I want? But, what is this moment asking of me? Not, will they approve? But, am I acting from truth? Not, will I win or fail? But, did I show up with presence? And from there, you begin to see the deeper freedom. Because every snapped thread becomes a doorway. Every lost outcome becomes a return to self. And every so-called failure becomes a place where something lighter, more honest, can begin. You start to move through life like a kite without strings, still guided by intention, still touched by the wind, but not held hostage by where you land. You trust that what's meant for you will come. And what leaves you was never truly yours, not in a cold way, but in a wise one. The more you practice this, the more you feel it in your body. The grip in your stomach softens, the tightness in your chest loosens, your breath becomes slower, because the nervous system, too, is tired of clinging. It was never designed for constant tension. It longs to be untied. And when people ask what changed, you won't say, I stopped caring. You'll say, I started living without needing everything to go my way. You'll say, I stopped measuring my value by things outside my control. You'll say, I released the thread and I didn't fall, I rose. That's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to control life, you begin to live it, fully, deeply, without fear. Because freedom is not found in holding tighter. It's found in letting go, not recklessly, but consciously, like the breath that leaves without resistance, like the thought that passes without judgment, like the kite that lifts when the wind calls it forward, not when the thread keeps it tied to safety. And so tonight, as you rest, let yourself feel what you've been gripping. Let yourself name it. The outcome you're still trying to force. The ending you haven't accepted. The dream you thought you couldn't live without. And with each breath, gently loosen the thread. Say quietly to yourself, even if it doesn't turn out how I hoped, I will be okay. Even if the plan changes, I will still find my way. Even if this chapter ends, I trust what will begin. Let those words settle into your bones. Let your breath carry them through your body. And if emotion rises, let it. You're not broken. You're releasing what was never truly yours to hold. Sleep will come softer now, not because everything is certain, but because you no longer need it to be. The thread has snapped, and for the first time, you're free. And when the thread breaks and you rise instead of falling, something unexpected happens. You realize that maybe it wasn't failure at all. Maybe it was life correcting your course, not punishing you, but purifying what you were clinging to. But even after the thread has snapped, even after you let go of the outcome, there's still something deeper the mind wants to do. Hold on to what's already past. Try to keep what's already leaving. Try to scoop water with a bowl full of cracks. This is where many remain stuck, clutching what was never meant to stay. The next step is to stop trying to keep the rain. Some things aren't taken from you. They simply pass through you, like rain on a rooftop. It falls, it touches, it leaves. And yet, how often does the mind try to preserve the unpreservable? A moment of happiness, a feeling of love, a version of yourself that no longer fits. The bowl gets filled, and instead of drinking, you try to freeze the water. You want to keep it, store it, protect it. But rain isn't meant to stay in one place. That's not its nature. And Buddhism reminds us, neither is life. The pain doesn't come from the rain passing through. It comes from the belief that it shouldn't. The suffering begins when the bowl tries to be permanent. When it forgets its purpose is not to hold forever, but to receive fully and then to release. This is the wisdom of impermanence. Anicca, one of the Buddha's core teachings. Everything changes, everything moves, everything fades. Not because something's wrong, but because change is the nature of all things. The tree loses its leaves, the river carves a new path, the breath leaves the body and returns as another. But the mind, conditioned by fear, resists this truth. It wants permanence in a world that offers none. Why? Because permanence feels safe. It gives the illusion of control. But that safety is a cage. When you try to keep the rain, you stop experiencing the rain. You stop feeling it. You stop being present with it. You spend so much time trying to hold it that you forget to let it nourish you before it moves on. This clinging shows up everywhere. In relationships that have already ended. In roles you no longer want to play. In versions of yourself that no longer feel alive. The bowl is empty, but you're still staring at it, wondering why you feel thirsty. And what about grief? That deep ache that comes when something dear is gone. Buddhism doesn't ask you to ignore grief. It asks you to understand it. To see that grief is not a sign that something went wrong, but a sign that something mattered. Grief honors impermanence. It says, "This touched me, and now it's gone." And in that space, something sacred is revealed. Not the pain of loss, but the beauty of having loved at all. When you release the need to retain, you begin to live lighter. You begin to meet moments with open hands instead of closed fists. You stop trying to trap joy like a firefly in a jar, and instead, you watch it dance, knowing that the dance is enough. The bowl that didn't keep the rain is not broken. It is wise. It knows that to hold something forever is to miss what it really is. Nothing stays, and that's not tragedy, it's freedom. The fear of impermanence comes from forgetting that you too are part of the flow. You are not separate from the changing world. You are not an object in time. You are time itself, passing, shifting, becoming. Every breath you take is proof that you are a process, not a possession. The self you cling to is already gone, already becoming something else. That doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters more, because it won't last, because you won't pass this way again. And so you learn to love not by owning, but by being present. You learn to appreciate not by collecting, but by noticing. You learn to live not by holding, but by flowing. This applies to success too, to happiness, to those perfect days that seem too good to end. If you cling to them, they spoil, but if you experience them fully, they leave a trace, a real trace, not something stored in a dusty memory, but something alive in how you walk forward. The best moments don't need to be kept. They shape you by passing through you. Impermanence also changes your relationship with pain. When you accept that all things pass, even suffering becomes less intimidating. The panic softens. You no longer say, "This will never end." You say, "This too will change." And suddenly you can breathe again. There is a deeper kind of strength in knowing you can let go. Not because you've become numb, but because you've become wise. Because you've seen that the tighter you hold, the more you lose. But the more you allow, the more you live. It's a different kind of courage. The courage to feel everything without needing to freeze it in place. The courage to love fully even when you know it will change. The courage to enjoy the moment without needing to capture it. The camera can't hold the sunlight. The bowl can't keep the rain. And that's okay. Stillness is easier when you stop trying to stop the flow. Peace is closer when you stop asking life to stay the same. The petals will fall, the song will end, the warmth will fade. But what remains is presence. Presence that touches everything, even as it holds nothing. And when the rain comes again, you don't try to hold it. You let it fall on your skin. You feel it. You smile. You say, "Thank you." And when it passes, you don't chase it. You stay still. You breathe. You wait for whatever comes next. That's the new rhythm. The bowl's strength is not in what it keeps. It's in how freely it empties, how ready it is to receive again. Life becomes generous when you stop hoarding what's meant to pass through. And suddenly, there's space. Space for the new, space for the real, space for what's actually here. Attachment says, "Don't go." Wisdom says, "Thank you for coming." Fear says, "What if it changes?" Trust says, "Of course it will." And love, true love, says, "Let it flow." This isn't giving up. It's waking up. Waking up to the truth that you were never meant to be a keeper of rain. You were meant to feel it, to be shaped by it, and then to let it go. Let that truth settle in now, in the quiet, in the breath. Whatever you're still trying to hold, maybe it's time to let it wash through. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared enough to stop resisting the flow. The bowl is not empty, it's ready, and so are you. And once you stop holding the rain, Once you accept that some things were never meant to stay, you begin to notice something even quieter: the echoes. Not the loud grief of what has ended, but the faint ache of what was never finished. Not the heartbreak of loss, but the restlessness of incompletion. These are the echoes that bounce inside the mind long after the moment is gone. Conversations that never ended cleanly, answers that never came, apologies that were never spoken. And for many, the real suffering isn't from the event. It's from the endless chase for closure. But what if closure is not something you find? What if it's something you stop needing? Some events in life don't come with explanations. Some endings don't offer goodbyes. Some people leave without a final word. And some questions live without answers for years or forever. But the mind doesn't like that. It circles, it replays, it demands understanding. It searches the past like a detective, looking for one more clue, one more thread, one more reason. And each time the answer doesn't come, the cycle begins again. That is the echo. Not the event itself, but the mind's attempt to resolve something that was never meant to be resolved. Buddhism invites us to see this clearly, to see that the desire for closure is often just another form of control. It's the attempt to tidy a story that life left open, to put a period where the sentence simply faded. But not every story ends the way we think it should. Some just stop. And the peace we're seeking is not in the conclusion, it's in the release. The echo that keeps chasing its voice lives in the past. It's the part of the mind that believes if it just thinks hard enough, it will finally make sense. But understanding does not always bring peace, and peace does not always require understanding. Sometimes the deepest healing comes not from figuring it out, but from giving yourself permission to move forward without it. This doesn't mean you ignore what happened. It means you stop using it as a measuring stick for your present. The past will not rewrite itself, and chasing echoes won't bring you closer to truth. It will only take you further from presence. There are things you deserve to hear, but never did. Things you wished someone had explained, but never could. There are wounds that still open when triggered. But healing doesn't mean closing every loop. It means learning how to stand in the silence of the unresolved and still feel whole. Meditation teaches this gently. When a thought returns, an echo, you notice it, you name it, and you let it pass. You don't fight it, you don't feed it, you don't run after it. You sit, you breathe, you allow. Because chasing that thought only gives it power. Observing it dissolves its grip. Some echoes are tied to identity. Why did they leave? Why wasn't I enough? What could I have done differently? But Buddhist practice reminds us that the self is not fixed. It's not a concrete structure. It's a collection of moments, changing, shifting. And when you let go of the need to define yourself through an unanswered story, your identity becomes fluid again. Free, no longer stuck in that one moment that keeps repeating. It's not easy. The mind will insist. But closure will help me let go. I just need to know why. But that need is a trap, because even when you get the answer, it doesn't erase the pain, and often it only raises more questions. Real closure doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. It comes from saying, even if I never get the answer, I choose to make peace with the silence. This applies to betrayal, to abandonment, to decisions others made that affected you deeply. You may never understand why someone hurt you. You may never know why they changed. But healing does not require their explanation. It requires your willingness to stop waiting. You can be whole without the apology. You can be free without the clarity. Because peace is not a gift they give you. It's something you claim when you stop depending on them to fix what they broke. This teaching is not about avoiding grief. It's about completing it, letting it do its work without dragging it into every future day. Grief becomes suffering when it becomes identity, when the echo becomes a soundtrack you live by. But you are more than what happened. You are more than the silence they left you in. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to stop hoping for a return. Some echoes are not signs, they're just noise. Let them fade. Buddhist teachings say that clinging to what is gone is like reaching for a reflection in the water. The more you grasp, the more distorted it becomes. But if you remain still, the image settles, and in that clarity, you no longer need the reflection to hold you. You become steady on your own. This doesn't mean you forget. It means you choose not to stay entangled. It means you see the story for what it was, unfinished, imperfect, human, and you let it remain where it belongs, in the past. Closure isn't a door someone else closes for you. It's a door you stop waiting at. A door you walk away from, not because you stopped caring, but because you care too much about your own peace to wait any longer. You will still hear echoes from time to time. That's okay. Let them come. Let them go. Do not answer them. Do not follow them. Do not give them your breath. Give your breath to this moment, to what's still possible, to what's real. Each time you do, the echo loses strength. Not because it fades, but because you no longer feed it. You no longer believe that it holds the missing piece. You realize that you were never incomplete to begin with. Buddhism teaches that everything arises and passes away. Thoughts, feelings, sounds, stories. The mind will try to resurrect them, but the path of practice is learning to see through that. To see that not everything that returns is meant to be re-entered. Some things are meant to be released again and again until one day they stop returning. And even if they don't, you are no longer shaken by them. They are echoes, not commands, not truths, not destinations, just leftover sound from a voice that no longer exists. This is how you reclaim your stillness, not by fixing the past, but by no longer chasing it. You stand in the now. You choose not to turn back. You let the echo echo, and you stay where you are. So tonight, if something returns, an old regret, a name, a voice you miss, greet it kindly, then let it go. Say to yourself, I don't need to hear the ending to make peace with the story. And let that be enough. You are not broken because something was left unresolved. You are not unworthy because someone didn't explain. You are not incomplete because life didn't tie the bow. The echo doesn't need to be answered. It needs to be released. And when the echo no longer pulls you back, when the unanswered questions begin to dissolve, you're left with something even harder to face. The parts of your past that you do remember, the things you wish you hadn't said, the choices that haunt you in the quiet, the moments you replay, not because they're unfinished, but because they hurt. And this is where another illusion lives, not in the search for answers, but in the belief that time can somehow be rewound, that if you just think hard enough, regret long enough, you might undo what's been done. But time does not turn around, and the clock never moves backward. There's a heaviness in regret that is different from grief. Grief aches for what was lost. Regret punishes for what might have been. It is not rooted in memory, but in comparison between the real and the imagined, between what is and what could have been. And the more the mind feeds it, the further it drifts from presence. Regret is the story that says, you should have known better. You could have done more. You messed it all up. But Buddhist wisdom invites you to ask, who is this voice serving, and what is it helping you become? If the past could be changed by thinking, you would have changed it already. Regret doesn't rewrite history. It rewrites identity. It convinces you that because something went wrong, you are wrong. It collapses the entire self into one moment, one mistake, one failure. But the Dharma reminds us that the self is not a static object. It is always unfolding. What you did back then was done by a version of you that no longer exists. That person made choices from a different place, different insight, different fear, different need. And holding today's self hostage for yesterday's actions only keeps you stuck in a prison built from shadows. The path to freedom is not pretending the past didn't happen. It's acknowledging it without attachment, seeing it as a chapter, not a sentence. It's understanding that wisdom is rarely born in perfection. It is carved out of error. It is shaped by the friction between who you were and who you are now trying to become. The Buddha didn't teach people to erase their past. He taught them how to stop clinging to it. And that begins with presence. Because regret cannot live where presence is strong. The more fully you inhabit this moment, the harder it becomes for the mind to drag you backward. Like trying to walk forward while staring only at the rear-view mirror, you lose your balance, your direction, your peace. Presence is not passive. It's not just being in the now. It is a discipline, a decision, a returning, again and again. Every time the past calls your name, presence answers first, with breath, with awareness, with the quiet reminder that is no longer real. This is. The body carries regret like a weight it doesn't know how to release. Shoulders tighten, chest caves, the breath becomes shallow. That's why meditation is such a powerful antidote. It doesn't solve regret intellectually, it dissolves it energetically. With each breath, you're telling your nervous system, you are no longer there, you are safe here. And slowly, the body begins to believe it. Time is movement, and suffering comes when you try to stop it. When you mentally live in the place your body already left. Buddhist wisdom compares this to a person carrying water in a broken jar. No matter how careful you are, the water keeps leaking, because it's not meant to be held. The past will not stay, and your job is not to scoop it up, but to notice the stream and keep walking. Regret often disguises itself as responsibility. I owe it to them to feel bad. I should carry this so I don't forget. But guilt is not the same as growth. Carrying pain does not repay a debt. It only creates more suffering. True accountability is not in self-punishment, it's in transformation. It's in becoming someone who would not make that choice again. That is redemption, and it lives in forward movement, not in mental repetition. Sometimes the mind doesn't even regret something you did. It regrets something that happened to you, and yet it still finds a way to blame you. You should have left sooner. You should have seen the signs. But this is another form of attachment, not to a person or outcome, but to the belief that you were supposed to be perfect, that somehow you should have known then what only hindsight makes clear. That is not wisdom. That is cruelty, and it has no place in a mind trained in compassion. Buddhist practice teaches that time is not linear. It's experienced through attention. If your mind lives in the past, you are there, not physically, but emotionally. And until you retrieve your attention, you remain scattered. But presence collects you. It gathers your energy back into the now, and with that return, peace becomes possible again. There's a phrase in the Zen tradition, let go or be dragged. Regret drags, not because the past is alive, but because your attachment to it is. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means unhooking. It means saying, yes, that happened, but I do not have to keep living it. The truth is, every moment you spend regretting is a moment you don't spend living. Every breath focused on what was is a breath stolen from what is. And the only place transformation happens is here. In this moment, in this inhale, in this step. Even when the regret feels overwhelming, ask yourself this: is this thought helping me heal, or just keeping me in pain? If it's not helping, you can gently release it, not out of denial, but out of devotion to your own peace. You may still feel the weight sometimes. That's normal. Let it come. Let it be seen. Then let it pass. You are not your past. You are the one watching it float by. And the more you watch without reaching, the more freedom you feel. Time only flows forward. The river does not turn back. And the more you align with this flow, the more peace becomes your natural state. Not because nothing hurts, but because you no longer resist the direction life moves in. If you want to honor the past, don't stay there. Live better now. Speak with more kindness. Act with more awareness. Give more freely. Be more fully awake in every choice. That is how you turn regret into something sacred, not by clinging, but by transforming. The clock does not rewind, but you are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be to start again. So tonight, when the thoughts come, let them come. Don't argue, don't explain. Just say, that was then, this is now, and return to the breath. Again and again, until the mind stops fighting time and begins to flow with it. Let the clock move forward. Let yourself move with it. And once you've accepted that time cannot move backward, that your only power is in how you meet this moment, you start to see another layer of attachment that often hides in plain sight. Expectations. They aren't loud like regret. They aren't sharp like loss. They arrive quietly, disguised as hope, as planning, as responsible thinking. But left unchecked, they become a weight. And for many, the pressure doesn't come from what's happening. It comes from what was supposed to happen. This is where potential gets drowned before it even begins to grow, not from lack of effort, but from the inability to let go of the rain you thought would feed you. There is a seed in each of us, a potential that doesn't bloom by force. It doesn't grow by certainty. It unfolds when the conditions are right. But the mind doesn't like that. The mind prefers control. So it brings water, too much water. It floods the soil with expectations. It tells the seed when it should bloom, how it should look, and what it must become. And in that flooding, the seed can't breathe. The very thing meant to nourish ends up smothering. Expectations are not the same as goals. Goals move with flexibility. They allow for change. Expectations demand. They say, "This is how it must be." And when it's not, the mind turns against itself. It blames. It doubts. It feels failure where there may have only been redirection. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes not from what is, but from the gap between what is and what was expected. That gap becomes a battlefield, a place where the present is not experienced, but constantly compared to an image that may never have been real to begin with. This happens in small ways. The day doesn't go as planned. A conversation doesn't go how you hoped. You feel off, tired, disconnected, and suddenly the mind says something is wrong. But maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe the only problem is that the moment didn't match the mental script. And the script was never life. It was an idea, a projection, a picture that never asked for permission to become reality. The problem with expectations is that they shrink the field of possibility. They create a narrow definition of success, of love, of happiness, and anything that falls outside that definition feels like failure, even if it's not. The seed may be growing roots when you're looking for flowers. It may be gathering strength while you're demanding results. And in that mismatch, frustration grows. But surrender changes everything. Surrender isn't weakness, it's alignment. It's when the mind stops arguing with the moment and begins to listen. When the inner storm quiets and you notice that something is still growing, even without your constant pressure. The seed that bloomed was the one left alone, the one that received just enough and was trusted to do the rest. Your life is not a machine that needs to be pushed. It is an unfolding that asks to be witnessed. And your potential is not something you have to force. It's something that reveals itself when you stop drowning it in what you think should be. Expectations often come from fear. The fear that if you don't plan everything, you'll be left behind. The fear that without control, you'll be forgotten. But the deeper truth is this: nothing real is ever lost. What's meant for you doesn't require micromanagement. It requires space, faith, a quiet confidence that even in the silence, something sacred is taking shape. This applies to creativity, to love, to personal growth. The more you expect, the less you see. Because your eyes aren't open to what is, they're scanning for what you thought would be there. And in that scanning, you miss the beauty that doesn't fit your picture. Buddhist mindfulness invites you to meet each moment with fresh eyes, to drop the lens of assumption, to stop demanding that today look like yesterday's vision board. The flower doesn't bloom because you yell at it. It blooms when it's ready, and that readiness isn't always visible. It often looks like stillness, like nothing's happening. But underneath, The roots are strengthening. The foundation is deepening. The timing is unfolding. When you release expectations, you start to move differently. You become curious instead of controlling, open instead of rigid, grateful instead of entitled. And that shift changes your energy. People feel it. Life responds to it. Opportunities emerge that weren't visible before, not because they weren't there, but because your expectations were blocking the view. Even with yourself, the same rule applies. Expectation creates pressure. Pressure creates resistance. Resistance creates stagnation. But self-compassion creates movement. And movement, when allowed, always finds its way forward. You don't have to demand perfection to grow. You only have to allow what's real to take root. There's an old teaching in Zen: let go or be dragged. But there's also this: surrender and you'll see what's already working. You'll see that maybe you were never behind. Maybe nothing is missing. Maybe the very thing you feared would be lost was never supposed to stay. And in that letting go, the seed finally breathes, and the rain, once released, becomes nourishment instead of flood. This doesn't mean you don't dream. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping. You move with intention, but without obsession. You trust your steps without needing to see the entire path. You hold your vision lightly, like a candle, not a chain. Letting go of expectation also heals relationships, because people are not meant to fulfill your script. They are meant to be experienced, and the more you expect them to behave a certain way, love you a certain way, agree with you in every way, the more tension you create. But when you meet them with presence, with curiosity, with room to be themselves, something deeper blooms. Real connection, honest love, unforced acceptance. And when expectations are released, disappointment softens. Not because you don't care, but because you no longer measure everything against a rigid standard. You become flexible. Not bendable from weakness, but strong from trust. Like bamboo in the wind, unshaken. The rain will fall again. The plans may shift again. But your peace no longer depends on exact timing. It depends on your openness. And the more open you are, the more surprises life can give you. The kind that expectations would have blocked. The kind that feel like miracles. Not because they're rare, but because you're finally able to see them. So tonight, notice where the rain has been heavy, where your thoughts are full of should, by now, it was supposed to. Notice how much energy that has taken, and with every breath, begin to release it. Not all at once, just gently, bit by bit. Say to yourself, the seed will bloom when it's ready. I don't have to force what's already unfolding. Let that truth settle into your bones. Let the tension leave your shoulders. Let your breath remind you that you're not behind, not broken, not late. You are growing in ways you cannot yet see. Let the rain go. Let the seed breathe. And watch what begins to bloom. And once the seed is allowed to grow without pressure, once you no longer demand the rain to arrive on your schedule, something else becomes clear. Life doesn't need to be forced to move forward. What grows with care grows stronger. What breathes without pressure breathes deeper. But this doesn't mean you have no power. It means your power is different than you thought. Not domination, not pushing, not making others or the world bend to your will. It's something softer, something wiser, like the wind, not controlling, but guiding, not forcing, but moving with intention. This is where the Buddhist teaching of skillful means comes alive. Influence without control is not weakness, it is mastery. It is the art of moving through the world without clinging to outcomes, speaking without needing to win, acting without trying to overpower. This is the wind that carries, the presence that shifts without shouting, the energy that transforms, not by pressure, but by resonance. In Buddhism, this is called upaya, skillful means. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it. The tone behind your words, the intention behind your choices, the awareness behind your actions. You can say the right thing in the wrong way and cause harm. You can speak a truth with arrogance and lose the heart of it. But when the heart is clear, when the ego has stepped aside, even the smallest word can move mountains. Skillful means begin with listening, not just to others, but to the moment itself. What does this moment need? Not what do I want to happen, but what is actually wise here? Sometimes the answer is silence. Sometimes it's action. Sometimes it's waiting. And knowing which one is right comes not from control, but from connection. Control tries to make everything fit. Skillful action responds to what is already unfolding. Control resists the flow. Wisdom learns how to ride it. This shows up in conversations. When someone disagrees, the reactive mind wants to argue, to prove, to overpower. But the skillful mind pauses. It watches. It asks, is this about truth or about control? Is this response about clarity or about being right? And in that pause, space opens. A breath returns. The wind moves, not like a storm, but like a breeze, subtle yet powerful. Even in relationships, the difference is clear. Control says, change so I can feel safe. Influence says, I will model calm, and that may shift something in you. Control demands. Wisdom offers. Control says, this is how it must be. The wind says, let me move around you, with you, towards something better. The power of the wind is in how it moves without attachment. It changes direction when needed. It doesn't get stuck in one path. It adapts. It bends without breaking. This is not passive. It is responsive. And in that responsiveness, there is deep intelligence. You stop reacting from habit and start responding from presence. Even the Buddha used skillful means. He didn't speak to everyone the same way. He met each person where they were. Some needed gentle words, others needed firm redirection, some needed stories, others needed silence. His wisdom wasn't in giving one answer to all. It was in feeling the energy of the moment and adjusting accordingly. Skillful influence begins by letting go of the need to be in control. It asks you to trust that you don't have to force your way forward. You don't have to manipulate to be heard. You don't have to dominate to make a difference. When your presence is rooted, your influence expands naturally. Control creates resistance. The more you push, the more others push back. But when your energy is calm, centered, and non-threatening, others soften. Not always immediately, but consistently. Because presence is contagious, and influence built from presence lasts longer than power built from fear. This isn't just about others, it's about how you treat yourself. control shows up in your own inner dialogue. The harsh voice, the rigid expectations, the constant self-judgment. But skillful means apply there too. What if you influenced your own growth with kindness? What if you guided yourself gently, like the wind guiding a sailboat? Not yanking, not sinking, just steady direction. When the mind is too forceful, even your good intentions become heavy. But when your energy aligns with patience and clarity, progress becomes more natural. You don't have to force discipline. You create the conditions where discipline feels welcome. You don't have to fight for growth. You become the ground where growth happens on its own. This kind of influence can't be faked. It comes from consistency, from your practice, from how you meet yourself in the quiet. When you are at peace with not controlling every moment, you gain the ability to move through life with power that doesn't break things. Skillful action is subtle. It's the soft tone that diffuses anger, the deep breath that calms an anxious thought, the decision to step back when the mind wants to rush in. It is not the loudest thing in the room, but it often becomes the most impactful. Even in leadership, the best influence is rooted in steadiness. People don't follow force, they follow clarity. And clarity comes when you no longer need to control every detail. You trust the direction. You adjust as needed. You move like wind, present, flexible, guided. This applies to teaching, to parenting, to healing. You cannot make someone change, but you can create space where change feels safe. You cannot force growth, but you can remove the pressure that blocks it. That is real power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to carry. So how do you train this? Through mindfulness, through watching your own energy. When the urge to push arises, ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What would happen if I didn't force this? What if I trusted timing instead of trying to speed it up? Each time you resist the urge to dominate, you strengthen your inner wind. You learn how to guide with less friction, how to touch without grabbing, how to move without crashing. This isn't inaction, it's precise action, like a feather falling in just the right spot, like a hand reaching only when it's truly needed, like words spoken at just the right volume to be heard, not shouted. The more you practice this, the more you begin to notice. People trust you more, they open up more, not because you told them to, but because your energy says they can. Influence grows from safety, not force. Even when things go wrong, skillful means help you recover. You don't panic, you respond, you shift, you become the wind again, not clinging to how it was supposed to go, but adjusting to how it is now. Let yourself be that wind. Let yourself move with clarity, not control. Let your presence speak louder than your pressure. Let your influence grow from how deeply you listen, not how hard you push. So tonight, breathe into the places where you've been trying too hard. The conversations you've tried to steer, the outcomes you've tried to force, the habits you've demanded to change overnight. And with each breath, soften. Let the pressure release. Let your energy adjust. Say to yourself, I can guide without gripping. I can move without controlling. I can influence with calm. And with that, let your presence deepen. And once you stop trying to steer the wind, once you release the urge to guide every outcome, you're left with the most difficult truth of all. Sometimes there's no clear path at all, no map, no signs, no confirmation that you're moving the right way, just forward, just breath, just step. And this is where real trust is forged. Not trust in plans, not trust in outcomes, but trust in the Dharma itself, the deeper law beneath your fears. The quiet knowing that even when the path disappears under your feet, there's still a way forward. There's a moment in life when clarity vanishes, when all the certainty that held you collapses. You lose the job, the relationship ends. The next step you thought was solid turns to mist, and the mind panics, because it was trained to walk only when the ground was visible. But the Dharma teaches otherwise. It teaches that sometimes the next step must be taken without a guarantee, not recklessly, not blindly, but with presence, with humility, with the understanding that not seeing the road doesn't mean the journey has ended. This is what it means to cultivate faith. Not blind belief, but grounded trust. Faith that if you stay rooted in awareness, the next step will reveal itself. That the Dharma, universal truth, natural law, moves even when you can't see it. That reality is unfolding with wisdom, even if that wisdom feels like uncertainty. The mind resists this deeply. It wants security. It wants control. It wants to know that each step leads somewhere safe. But security is often just a habit, not a truth. And control is usually just anxiety in disguise. The more we cling to what's visible, the more we suffer when it disappears. But the teachings show another way. Walk anyway. This kind of walking is not mechanical, it's devotional. Each step becomes a practice, a moment of listening, a reminder that clarity is not a requirement for movement, that the unknown is not the enemy. It's the place where life is still alive, where possibility still exists. To walk without a visible path is to live from the inside out. It's to stop relying on outer conditions to tell you what's right. It's to start listening to what doesn't shout, the breath, the body, the stillness beneath the thoughts. These become your compass when the old map burns. And yes, fear will rise. Fear of making a mistake, fear of wasting time, fear of being lost. But fear is not a stop sign. It's just a signal, a moment of tightening. And when you see it, you don't retreat. You breathe through it. You soften into it. You take the step anyway. The Buddha never promised a clear path. He promised freedom. And freedom often looks like standing in the dark with your eyes open, no longer searching for a spotlight, just learning how to walk with your own light, no matter how small. This applies to every transition, when one chapter ends and the next hasn't begun, when the identity you once had no longer fits and the new one hasn't taken shape. These liminal spaces are sacred, not because they feel good, but because they're real, raw, honest. They strip away illusion and leave you face to face with yourself. And this is where practice becomes more than theory. This is where all the meditation, all the letting go, all the awareness is tested. Can you stay with yourself when nothing else stays? Can you keep walking when even the path beneath your feet has vanished? This is not about endurance, it's about presence. You don't rush through the unknown. You don't try to outthink it. You meet it fully. You let it shape you. You become the kind of person who doesn't just survive uncertainty, but becomes more alive in it. Because when the path disappears, distractions fall away. You can't rely on autopilot. You have to wake up. You have to look closely, listen deeply, respond from your core, not your conditioning. And in doing so, something beautiful happens. You begin to trust not the path, but your capacity to walk. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is true right now?" That becomes your next step. Truth, not comfort, not certainty, truth. And the more you walk in truth, the more you see that every step taken in awareness becomes a path. The Dharma is not something outside of you. It's not a doctrine. It's the rhythm beneath all things, the quiet intelligence in breath, in death, in rebirth, in stillness. And when the ground disappears, the Dharma remains, like gravity, like sky, like breath. This doesn't mean you won't feel lost. It means you stop fearing lostness. You stop making it mean failure. You start seeing it as part of the way. Because the map was never the journey. The path was never the point. The point was who you become when there's nothing left to hold on to but your own awareness. Even in daily life, this teaching applies. You don't always know what's next. You don't always feel ready. The conversation is hard, the decision unclear, the future unpredictable. But still, you can step, with kindness, with courage, with the understanding that movement itself is clarity. Letting go of needing to see the path doesn't mean acting without care. It means acting without control. It means making choices not from desperation, but from alignment. Not from fear, but from faith. And each time you do, you become less attached to outcome and more committed to truth. And over time, this becomes a way of being. You stop panicking when the map dissolves. You stop searching for guarantees. You trust that your presence is the path. That each step lived with mindfulness is enough. That walking into the unknown is not a flaw. It's part of the design. Even when others doubt you, when the world demands certainty, you stay steady. You don't need to explain your path. You just need to walk it. With each breath, with each step, you reaffirm, "I may not know where this leads, but I trust how I'm walking." Let yourself walk like that tonight. Let yourself breathe through the uncertainty. You don't need to know everything. You just need to stay here, present, honest, willing to move without a script, willing to let the Dharma carry you even when your mind cannot see the road. And when you've learned to walk, even when the ground disappears, when each step is no longer a demand for clarity, but a quiet act of trust, there's something even deeper that begins to awaken. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to be forced into the moment. It's already here. It's always been here. The bell doesn't need to be struck to ring. It rings from within, and the sound comes only when everything else goes still. This is where wisdom begins, not as an achievement, but as a natural unfolding that happens the moment control finally lets go. There's a kind of knowing that doesn't come from thinking. It doesn't arrive through effort or analysis. It's not something you figure out. It's something that rises when space is made for it. But most of the time, the space is filled with plans, with opinions, with strategies and mental rehearsals. The bell of inner truth waits in silence, but the mind rarely leaves enough quiet to hear it. So it stays silent, not because it's absent, but because it's drowned out. Buddhist teachings point to this again and again. The wisdom you seek is not far away. It's not locked in a sacred book or a distant monastery. It's already here, resting beneath the noise. But to find it, you must stop trying to strike the bell. You must stop demanding answers from the world and start listening to the stillness within. This kind of wisdom doesn't arrive with flashing lights. It's subtle. It moves like a shift in the wind, like a body relaxing after years of tension. You don't even realize it's come until you feel different, calmer, clearer, more aligned. And it didn't come from doing more. It came from finally doing less. In meditation, this is why we let the breath lead, not because the breath gives us answers, but because it returns us to presence. It teaches us to stay, and in that staying, the mind begins to quiet, the body begins to loosen, and what rises from that stillness is not silence, but signal. A soundless guidance that doesn't use language, but speaks directly to the center of your being. It is tempting to seek wisdom through action, to chase after the next insight, the next method, the next spiritual breakthrough. But sometimes the most radical step is stopping, not quitting life, but pausing the constant reaching. The bell rings when nothing else is moving. It reveals itself not through force, but through surrender. You've already seen how control interferes with people, with outcomes, with inner peace. But it also blocks insight. It keeps your awareness at the surface, constantly solving, reacting, adjusting. And surface living creates surface answers, shallow clarity that doesn't last. But when you drop into stillness, not to escape, but to dwell, you begin to notice something deeper, the wisdom that has always been speaking beneath the static. This isn't about abandoning the mind, it's about putting it in its proper place, letting it serve the present rather than dominate it. When the mind becomes quiet, awareness deepens. You begin to feel truth, not just think it. You begin to know what to do, not because a voice told you, but because the path feels unmistakably clear, like a bell that finally echoes across a silent room. True insight doesn't argue, it doesn't rush, it simply is. It arises when your need to force disappears, when your grip on the situation loosens, when your identity no longer hinges on knowing. In that moment, the truth doesn't need to be proven. It just rings, and the sound is unmistakable. This is why so many of the deepest spiritual moments happen in silence, in solitude, in stillness. Not because those moments contain more information, but because they clear the space for inner truth to rise. A bell can't be heard in a storm, but remove the storm, and the quietest ring becomes a revelation. Sometimes, the wisdom you need is not a solution. It's a realization that no solution is needed, that what you thought was a problem is simply a passing cloud, that what you thought had to be fixed is already resolving itself. This kind of knowing is not passive. It's active in its stillness. It moves the way water shapes rock, softly, steadily, without noise. The practice is to stop intervening where presence is enough. Stop managing what peace alone can tend to. This means pausing before reacting, breathing before speaking, waiting before jumping to conclusions. And in that pause, you'll start to hear it, the bell that rings without striking. And when you hear it, you'll know. Not because it tells you everything you want to hear, but because it resonates with something so deep inside you that doubt can't touch it. The clarity doesn't need to be explained. It simply feels right. This kind of inner clarity also transforms how you show up in the world. You no longer rush decisions. You stop arguing just to be right. You don't force your perspective on others. You trust that your presence, grounded in truth, is enough to influence the space around you. You become less reactive and more reflective, not because you're unsure, but because you're connected to a deeper confidence that doesn't need to shout. This is where real transformation begins. Not in the moments where everything goes according to plan, but in the ones where you stop planning and start listening. In those moments, something ancient within you wakes up. Not a new version of yourself, but the version that's been waiting beneath all the roles and expectations. You begin to trust your silence more than other people's noise. You begin to rest, not because the work is done, but because you know that rest itself is part of the work. You stop needing to fix things that aren't broken. You start recognizing that the greatest wisdom is not something you collect. It's something you uncover. And when others come to you for answers, you don't rush to give advice. You hold space. You listen. Because you know that sometimes the best guidance isn't given. It's discovered in stillness. The bell doesn't need to be struck. It needs silence to be heard. Let this be your invitation now, to stop solving for a moment, to stop reaching, to simply sit with yourself as you are, without agenda, to feel the breath, not as a tool, but as a presence. Let everything else settle. Let your thoughts rest. Let your emotions pass. And in the quiet that remains, notice what arises. It may be soft, it may be subtle, but it is real and it is yours. Let this be the moment you stop demanding wisdom and start allowing it. Let this be the silence where something true begins to ring. And when you finally stop striking the bell, when you begin to hear the wisdom that rises in silence without force, something even more delicate begins to appear. That wisdom doesn't just point you toward peace or clarity. It also points you toward endings, quiet ones, sudden ones, inevitable ones. And this is where the mind may resist again. Because even when silence shows the truth, it's not always a truth the heart feels ready to face. Sometimes it's the truth that something is over. A season has passed, a connection has run its course, and the only way forward now is to let go. There's a moment just before the leaf falls that holds everything. The beauty of what was, the sorrow of its passing, the instinct to hold on, and the silent understanding that no amount of gripping can keep it from the ground. That moment lives inside every human heart. It comes when the job ends, when the friendship fades, when the dream no longer fits. And the truth is clear, not because it's loud, but because it no longer waits for your permission to be real. Buddhist practice asks us to meet that moment not with resistance, but with reverence. Not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. Endings are not mistakes, they are movements, natural shifts in the rhythm of life. And while the mind may label them as loss, the Dharma sees them differently, as transitions, as openings, as the shedding required for deeper roots to grow. The pain comes not from the ending itself, but from the belief that it shouldn't be ending, that you could somehow freeze time. keep the tree in full bloom forever. But nature does not work that way. It transforms. It evolves. It makes space for what's next by letting go of what no longer serves. And to live aligned with that rhythm is to live in harmony with truth. When you hold on to what is already falling, suffering increases. You tighten, you resist, you prolong something that's already slipping away. But when you soften, even just a little, you begin to feel something different. Not the finality of death, but the beginning of release. And in that release, there is peace. The leaf does not resent the wind. It does not protest the fall. It lets go when the moment comes, not because it wants to leave, but because it trusts the cycle. It knows that its time is not ending. It's transforming. It is no longer what it was, but it is not lost. It returns to the earth. It nourishes what comes next. This is how Buddhist practice teaches us to meet change. Not as something to be fixed, but something to be welcomed with awareness. The end of a relationship, the closing of a chapter, the moment when the identity you once carried no longer fits. These are not failures. These are signs of life moving. To embrace natural endings, you must first see them clearly, not rush past them, not numb them, not disguise them as detours, but honor them for what they are, necessary turning points, invitations to shed what no longer aligns, and that requires presence, presence that does not demand closure, but allows for integration. Grief may still rise. It often does. That is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of love, of connection, of how much something mattered. But grief is not an enemy. It is a companion that walks beside you until you are ready to walk alone again. And walking alone is not a punishment. It is a practice, a chance to return to yourself, to listen more closely, to notice who you are when the old roles fall away, when the attachments loosen, when the story begins to change. Endings also bring space, and in that space, a new kind of breath appears, a deeper inhale, a softer exhale, not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer fighting what can't be stopped. You are no longer pouring energy into resistance. You are letting life move. The leaf does not return to the branch, and you don't have to return to versions of yourself that you've outgrown. Growth doesn't always look like building something new. Sometimes it looks like dissolving what is finished, honoring it, and allowing the empty space to remain empty for a while. There is wisdom in the pause between what was and what's next. That pause can feel like death, but it is often the beginning of new roots taking hold beneath the surface. You don't always have to know what comes next. You just have to trust that letting go is not the end of your story. It's part of how your next chapter is born. The mind might say, "But I gave so much. But it wasn't supposed to end like this." And those thoughts are valid. They're echoes of attachment, not proof that something has gone wrong. You are allowed to mourn what ended. You are allowed to cry over the leaf that fell, but you do not need to carry it forever. Some things were beautiful. Some things taught you. Some things stayed longer than they should have, and all of them shaped you. The letting go is not a rejection of the past. It's a commitment to the present. A quiet agreement to meet life as it is, not as you wanted it to stay. When you stop resisting endings, you begin to recognize their beauty. the relief of not having to pretend anymore, the honesty of saying, "This has run its course," the strength it takes to stop clinging and start trusting. This doesn't mean you disconnect from love. It means your love becomes freer, less possessive, more alive. It means you don't demand permanence in a world made of change. You don't need forever to feel something deeply. You don't need guarantees to give your heart fully. Every leaf that falls is a teacher. It shows you how to release with grace, how to let go without losing yourself, how to face the wind with open arms instead of clenched fists. And every time you do, you become lighter. Not because you're less, but because you're more in tune with what matters now. Tonight, if something is ending, if you're standing at the edge of something you don't want to let go of, breathe with it, name it, feel the weight of it, and then, with kindness, begin to release it. You don't have to force the fall, just loosen your hold. Let the natural process unfold. Say to yourself, "I trust what's ending. I trust what will grow in its place. I don't need to hold what no longer holds me." And with that, feel the ground return beneath your feet. Not because everything is certain, but because you are no longer trying to stand still in a season that's already moved on. The leaf has let go, and now so can you. And when the leaf finally falls, when you no longer grip what has already gone, something unexpected happens. Not just emptiness, but openness. Space not filled with fear or regret, but with possibility. And this space leads to one of the most transformative truths of all. You don't have to keep taking to feel full. You don't need to possess to feel secure. Sometimes the greatest power is not in what you hold, but in what you freely give. Not to control, not to gain, but to release. This is where generosity or dharma becomes not just an act of kindness, but a deep spiritual practice. The hand that opens without taking is not weak, it is awake. In Buddhist tradition, generosity is considered the first perfection. It's not secondary, it's foundational. Because to give without attachment is to confront one of the core illusions of suffering, that we must cling to have enough, that what we own defines our worth, that holding on protects us. But true giving undoes this illusion at the root. It teaches the mind that value doesn't come from what is stored, but from what flows. Dana is not charity. It's not a performance. It's a quiet offering that comes from a place beyond ego. It is a giving that expects nothing. It is the absence of grasping disguised as kindness. It is the surrender of control under the cover of compassion. This is important because many people give but still cling. They give their time, their love, their effort, but hold on to expectations. They want appreciation. They want recognition. They want control over how the gift is received. But this isn't true dharma. That's a transaction, and transactions carry weight. True generosity carries none. When the hand opens without needing to take, it no longer fears loss. It doesn't calculate worth. It simply allows flow. And this flow heals both the giver and the receiver. The giver is freed from self-obsession. The receiver is given space to feel seen without debt. No one is bound. Nothing is owned. Buddhist practice teaches that giving breaks the illusion of permanence. The act of letting something go, a material possession, time, attention, reminds us that we do not own anything, not truly. Even the body we live in is borrowed. Every moment of life is a gift we can't keep. Dharma mirrors this truth. When you give, you align with reality instead of fighting it. And it extends beyond things, giving attention without needing to be the center, giving love without controlling how it returns, giving forgiveness without holding it over someone's head. These are harder forms of generosity because they ask us to let go of emotional control, the subtle kind that hides inside noble acts. But here's the paradox. The more freely you give, the more you receive, but not in the way the mind expects. You receive peace, lightness, connection that's not based on power, trust that isn't bought, joy that isn't earned. And you begin to feel that what you feared you would lose through giving is the very thing giving returns to you tenfold. Dana also softens the walls between self and other. It blurs the hard line of separation. When you give genuinely, the illusion of isolation weakens. You see that the line between mine and yours is not as solid as it seemed. You begin to understand that your joy is linked to theirs, that your peace is not private property, but something that grows through shared humanity. This is not a philosophy to admire from afar. It's a practice, a way of moving through the world, a habit of offering, not as a performance, but as a reflection of presence. You give not because you're supposed to, but because you see the moment clearly, and the most natural response is openness. And that openness trains the heart. Each act of generosity becomes a quiet lesson in detachment, not cold detachment, but warm freedom. You offer and you let go. You act and you don't grip the outcome. And this trains you to live more lightly, to move through the world with less friction, less need. This practice also works in reverse. When you withhold, when you cling, you feel it in your body. The tightness, the fear, the pressure. Holding too much of anything creates suffering. Even the grasping at good feelings becomes exhausting. But when the hand opens, the body breathes, the heart expands, the mind rests. Generosity, when practiced deeply, undoes the identity of lack. That hidden story that says, I don't have enough. I'm not enough. If I give, I'll be empty. But giving proves otherwise. Giving shows you that you are already full, that you don't need to protect your peace with walls. You can offer it, share it, live from it. And this applies not only to individuals, but to the way we relate to the world. A society built on taking, on endless accumulation, on hoarding status and safety, creates collective anxiety. But generosity softens the system. It introduces trust into a cycle that runs on fear. It reminds people that not everything is a transaction, that value can exist outside of profit, that relationships can be built on care, not leverage. In the teachings, even the Buddha himself relied on dana. He didn't sell his teachings, he offered them, and the communities that supported him did so not out of obligation, but out of reverence. It was a mutual generosity, an energy of flow, not extraction. So how do you live this? It begins with awareness. Notice when you hold too tightly, when your giving comes with strings, when your kindness masks control, and then begin to open small steps. Give without explanation, without waiting for praise, without needing a specific outcome. not to feel better, just to be free. And when the fear rises, and it will, breathe through it. Let your body remember that you are not losing, you are releasing, you are stepping back into rhythm with reality, into the truth that everything you try to keep will one day be taken anyway. So, let it move through you. Let it do its work in someone else's life. And do this not just when it's easy, but when it's hard, when the heart wants to close, when the ego wants to protect, when your pain says, "Don't give again." That's when the practice becomes real. That's when Dana stops being an idea and becomes a transformation. Because what you're really giving up isn't the thing. It's the illusion that you need it to be whole. So tonight, feel your hands, literally. Let them rest open on your lap. Let the body show you the gesture. And then ask yourself, where can I open more? What have I been gripping? Not just in objects, but in thoughts, in relationships, in identity. Let the answers come. Let them be gentle. You don't have to fix it all now. Just begin. Begin with the smallest offering, a thought released, a kindness given, a need let go. And as you rest, repeat silently, I can offer without owning. I can love without holding. I can live with open hands. And when the hand opens without needing to take, when the act of giving becomes a soft release instead of a silent demand, something begins to shift. You start to feel less tangled, less rushed, less burdened by the invisible weight of having to shape everything perfectly. But there's still one place where control quietly hides: the breath. Not the act of breathing itself, but the tension that builds when you forget to return to it, when life spins too fast, when the urge to fix everything takes over. And yet, with one inhale, everything can settle. The dust doesn't need to be swept. It needs to be left alone long enough to land. And that's what mindful breathing offers: a return to peace, not through effort, but through presence. In the Buddhist path, the breath is not just a biological necessity, it's a bridge, a thread between the body and the mind, between reaction and awareness, between the chaos of the world and the clarity within. And unlike anything else you might rely on, it is always available, always faithful, always here. Mindful breathing is not dramatic. It won't make the problems disappear. It won't erase your schedule or give you immediate answers. But what it does is even more powerful. It stops the spiral. It breaks the pattern. It invites the nervous system to pause before it tries to fix, solve, defend, or chase. It shifts the attention from the storm to the eye of it. The breath grounds. It does not need to be manipulated to do this, simply noticed, received, felt. When the mind is racing, the breath slows the race. When the body is bracing, the breath softens the grip. It reminds you that not everything has to be controlled, because not everything is broken. The world teaches urgency, alerts, demands, notifications, problems you're told must be handled now. But the breath teaches a different tempo. It slows the drumbeat. It turns down the volume. It says, you can be here just as you are. You don't need to solve this moment. You only need to return to it. And that return is where peace begins. Not the peace that comes from everything going your way, but the peace that's been waiting under the noise. Like dust finally settling once the wind stops thrashing. This doesn't mean life stops happening, but how you meet it changes. Instead of reacting to everything with urgency, you begin to respond from stillness. Instead of trying to change the external world to find peace, you start tending to the space within you where peace already lives. Breathing with awareness doesn't require effort. It requires willingness. A willingness to stop for a few seconds and turn inward. To notice the inhale as it rises. To follow the exhale as it leaves. To be with that movement without needing to fix or change it. And in that pause, the internal storm begins to fade. Many traditions talk about finding peace, but the Buddha pointed directly to the breath as a path to it. Not as a symbolic idea, but as a real, physical, embodied tool. The Anapanasati Sutta, one of the foundational teachings, is entirely centered on mindfulness of breathing, not because breath is special, but because it is honest, present, unfiltered. The breath doesn't lie. It reflects the truth of how you are. Shallow when afraid, tight when angry, held when anxious. But even then, it doesn't abandon you. It waits for your attention, and the moment you give it your awareness, it begins to shift. Not because you forced it, but because presence itself has healing power. When you meet the breath with compassion, it responds. When you meet it with judgment, it resists. But if you let it be what it is, just air moving in and out, it becomes a friend, a quiet companion reminding you that control isn't necessary, that urgency is optional, that peace begins not with achievement, but with stillness, and that stillness allows everything else to reorganize. Thoughts stop stacking, emotions loosen, reactions pause. The space between stimulus and response expands, and in that space, wisdom begins to move, the kind that doesn't come from thinking harder, but from thinking less. Breath invites you to leave the fight, the inner battle to perfect yourself, to constantly be on guard, to always be solving. It says, what if nothing needs to be fixed right now? And even if the problems are real, even if life is loud, the breath gives you shelter, not from the world, but from the false belief that you are its prisoner. This is not escape. It's reorientation, a chance to step back into yourself before stepping out again. And the more often you return, the more natural it becomes. Breath becomes baseline, home, anchor. When others are loud, when the mind is spinning, when pain rises, the breath is the first and last place to come back to. Because before you can hold anyone else, before you can respond with wisdom, before you can offer peace, you must first breathe into your own. Even the moments of deep struggle can soften when you allow yourself to feel the breath fully. It becomes a rhythm to follow when everything else is uncertain. It becomes a doorway into the now, and in the now, solutions often appear that can't be found in the storm of reaction. And even when no solution comes, even when the confusion remains, breath gives you enough space to hold it, to sit with it without drowning. That alone is healing. That alone is enough. This is why in Buddhist meditation there is no rush to stop thinking. The breath is not used to block thought, but to meet it differently, to sit beside it instead of inside it, to stop believing every urgent message it sends. And eventually, thought quiets, not by force, but by being seen. The dust settles because you're no longer kicking it up. The mind softens because it's no longer being chased. The heart opens because it's no longer bracing for the next blow. And breath continues, gently, patiently, rhythmically, showing you that life is still here, even in the uncertainty. That there is something underneath the worry. That the moment you return to what's real, the need to fix everything starts to dissolve. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring differently, from a grounded place, from a clear place, from a place that doesn't lose itself while trying to help. So tonight, let yourself stop fixing, stop solving, even for just a few breaths. Let the world do what it will for now. Let the questions remain open. Let the dust fall. Breathe in, not to achieve calm, but to remember it. Breathe out, not to control the moment, but to surrender to it. And as your body begins to relax, feel the return, not to who you were before the stress, but to who you are beneath it. You are not the whirlwind. You are the space it moves through. You are not the noise. You are the one who listens. And the breath is your reminder. Every time, let it guide you. Let it clear the air. And once the breath is returned to, once the body softens and the dust begins to settle, there is something else that becomes visible. Not through effort, not through force, but through the stillness that remains. It becomes clear that peace doesn't arrive by solving every problem or by silencing every fear. It comes from not needing to resist the dark, from no longer trying to push it away. It comes from realizing that presence itself is a light. A single candle does not shout at the darkness. It doesn't fight. It simply burns. And that is enough. There is a deep misunderstanding in the mind that says, if suffering exists, it must be eliminated. That pain must be pushed away. That darkness must be defeated through struggle. But the Buddhist path points to a quieter, more radical truth. The darkness doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be lit. And that light does not come from rage or control or perfection. It comes from attention, from being fully here, from not turning away. Suffering, in its many forms, tends to grow in shadows. It feeds off avoidance, off the tension of inner war. But the moment awareness enters, it begins to lose shape. It's not that the pain vanishes, but the grip it holds begins to loosen. The wound, no longer hidden, begins to breathe. You've already seen that control can't make everything better. You've seen that letting go brings clarity, that silence holds wisdom, and that breath brings peace. Now the next step is even softer, the realization that presence is powerful on its own. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need to fight every emotion. You only need to remain present with it. Just like a candle doesn't argue with the dark. It just shines. This way of being doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean that you sit back and watch the world burn. It means that your action comes from light, not fear. That your choices arise from clarity, not panic. You're not driven by the need to push darkness out. You're guided by the light that naturally arises when you stay centered. Presence has a quality that is hard to describe but easy to feel. It doesn't solve the world's problems in one breath, but it changes the energy of the space. It shifts the way you relate to what's difficult. When you stop resisting, you stop feeding the thing you're afraid of. When you stop pushing, you stop reinforcing the tension. The candle teaches that you can hold pain without becoming it, that you can sit with fear without needing it to disappear, that your stillness can be more healing than your strategies, and that your attention, steady, non-judging, gentle, is the most powerful force you have. So many people think peace is something to be earned, that if they do enough, change enough, win enough battles within themselves, they'll finally deserve peace. But peace isn't a prize. It's a state that's already available, not when everything is quiet, but when you stop running from the noise. You don't light a candle to make the dark go away. You light it because that's what candles do. And the dark, seeing it, begins to shift. This is how the Dharma works. It doesn't promise that the darkness will leave. It doesn't offer escape. It offers a path into presence. And in that presence, everything becomes less frightening. Not because it's changed, but because you have. When you stop resisting, you open. When you open, you allow. And when you allow, healing begins, not as a project, but as a process. That process cannot be rushed, but it doesn't need to be, because even a little light changes the whole room. You may still feel sadness, still experience fear, still face uncertainty, but you won't panic in it. You won't collapse into it, because now there's a candle burning at the center of it all, and you know how to keep it lit, not by fanning it with anxiety, but by protecting it with presence. This isn't just a mental state, it's a lived practice, in every breath, in every moment where you could react, but instead choose to stay. When you feel the urge to run, and instead choose to remain rooted. When you soften instead of tighten. When you allow instead of defend. That is the candle. That is the light. And it doesn't need to be big, just consistent, just steady, just honest. Even in relationships, this energy transforms everything. When someone brings chaos or pain into your space, the old reaction might have been to fight or fix, but now the response shifts. You hold the light. You stay present. You don't get pulled into their storm. You offer clarity, not as dominance, but as steadiness. The darkness is not the problem. The resistance to it is, because the more you fight it, the more you entangle with it. But the moment you let go of that fight, you begin to see through it. You see that it's not solid. That much of the fear was built from habit, not truth. And so you keep your light steady, not to control the moment, but to meet it, to allow what is without collapsing into it, to stand with an open heart, not a clenched fist. You might feel small at first, fragile, like a flickering flame in a vast night. But over time, you'll begin to notice something surprising. The more consistent your presence, the more the world around you begins to soften too, not because you changed it, but because you stopped resisting it. The light you carry doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply exists. And in that existence, everything begins to feel possible again. So tonight, you don't need to chase anything. You don't need to fix anything. Let the thoughts come. Let the emotions rise. Let the body feel what it feels. And through all of it, stay. Don't flee. Don't argue. Just breathe. Just witness. Just be. That's the candle. And from this place, your life begins to transform, not because the darkness has ended, but because your light no longer depends on its absence. And when the light doesn't need to chase the dark, when the candle simply burns and the resistance melts, what remains is not silence, but clarity. A clarity that begins to reveal just how much of what we called struggle was never truly real. Not because the pain wasn't there, but because the mind was telling a story about the pain. The suffering wasn't always in the experience, it was in the interpretation, the belief, the attachment to how things appeared. And this is where perception becomes the final gate, because the eye that blinked and missed the burden didn't make the weight disappear. It simply stopped mistaking it for something it had to carry. There's an old saying in Buddhist practice, "With our thoughts, we make the world." It doesn't mean the world is imaginary. It means our experience of it is shaped by how we see it, not by the raw data, but by the frame, by the lens we wear without realizing. And much of what we call control is not in our hands, it's in our perception. The belief that if we think hard enough, worry long enough, analyze deep enough, we'll gain power over what scares us. But that search for power creates more tension. The real shift comes when you start to see that the burden was never what happened. It was the story built around it. When awareness sharpens, you begin to notice that most control isn't action, it's attention. It's the way the mind keeps circling, trying to make sense of everything before it lets go. It believes struggle is proof of strength, that if it can just grip a little tighter, the fear will leave. But sometimes all that's needed is a blink, a soft release, and in that tiny pause, the illusion crumbles. Not because you figured it out, but because you stopped staring at it through the lens of resistance. The mind often creates tension by assuming its version of reality is the truth. But perception is not truth. It's a translation. And translations can distort. They can miss the nuance. They can turn a breeze into a threat. But when awareness opens wider, you start to see that the struggle was never in the wind. It was in how you braced for it. This is where mindfulness does its deepest work, not in calming the moment, but in recalibrating how you see the moment. When you stop automatically labeling what's happening as good or bad, success or failure, threat or comfort, the moment becomes spacious. And in that space, the pressure drops. A shift in perception can feel like a miracle. But it's not magic. It's the mind remembering how to see without projection. Like noticing that a shadow isn't a monster, just the shape of something misunderstood. Or realizing the weight on your shoulders was never yours to carry. You just believed it was. This awareness allows you to question the stories, not by replacing them with new ones, but by stepping back enough to see that they're not fixed. You thought the meeting went badly, but what if it didn't? You thought the silence meant rejection, but what if it was peace? You thought the delay meant failure, but what if it was realignment? The mind rarely tells neutral stories. It fills in gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions become beliefs, and beliefs become burdens. But once you begin to see that what you feel isn't always caused by the moment itself, but by the meaning you gave it, you begin to unlock the freedom that was hiding in plain sight. Buddhism doesn't ask you to erase perception. It asks you to examine it, to get curious about the lens, to see the gap between what's happening and what you believe it means. That gap is everything. It's where freedom lives. Because if perception can change, then your relationship with life can too. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop assuming that every emotion confirms a truth. The emotion is real. The pain may be real, but the meaning doesn't have to be fixed. You can feel hurt and still question the story that says you're not enough. You can feel fear and still recognize that the danger might be imagined. You can feel anger and still pause before deciding someone is against you. A blink is a small thing, but in practice, it's powerful. It's the moment you stop staring so hard at the thing that scares you. It's the breath between reaction and reflection. It's the decision to soften your view long enough to consider that maybe, just maybe, you're seeing the situation through a filter you didn't choose. And that filter is often made of old pain, old defenses, old definitions of worth. It clouds the present with echoes of the past. But perception can be updated, not forcefully, not by erasing what you see, but by noticing how you see and letting the seeing expand. This is why meditation can be transformative, not because it gives you new information, but because it gives you new eyes. Eyes that stop scanning for what's wrong. Eyes that notice the tension in your jaw and don't make it a story. Eyes that see the sadness and hold it without needing it to mean catastrophe. The burden begins to dissolve, not because it becomes lighter, but because it no longer has your identity wrapped around it. You stop being the one who must carry it. You become the one who sees it. And that shift from being to seeing changes everything. It also changes how you show up for others. You stop projecting your fear onto them. You stop reading their silence as rejection. You stop assuming their struggle is yours to solve. You begin to see people more clearly because your perception is no longer hijacked by your own unexamined fear. This shift doesn't mean you become passive. It means your actions become cleaner, more precise, less entangled. You don't need to control what someone thinks of you if you no longer believe your worth depends on it. You don't need to defend every choice if you trust the clarity behind it. You don't need to be seen a certain way if your self-view is no longer built on fragile narratives. What was once a burden begins to fade, not because life changed, but because you stopped gripping your own version of it so tightly. So, tonight, let your awareness widen. Let your gaze soften, not just outwardly, but inwardly too. Notice where you've been staring at a problem without blinking, where the mind has been frozen in its version of what's wrong, and gently blink. Let the muscles of perception relax. Let the stories unravel. Let the meanings return to silence. Say to yourself, I don't need to control what I can see differently. I can meet this moment without believing everything my mind tells me about it. And in that soft shift, the burden begins to dissolve. And once the burden has been seen for what it is, an illusion held in the grip of perception, you begin to understand that most of the pressure you felt was not coming from the world, but from the way you thought you had to move through it, the way you believed strength had to look, direct, defiant, unbending. But the mind, when it softens, reveals a deeper kind of strength, not in confrontation, not in proving, but in adapting without losing who you are. This is the quiet wisdom of the river, the current that does not argue with the rock. It flows around it, and in doing so, it shapes the world without ever needing to resist it. The Buddhist path teaches that force is rarely the most skillful response. Even when faced with opposition, with difficulty, with misunderstanding, The Dharma invites something else: flexibility. This doesn't mean weakness, it means precision. It means knowing when to stand still and when to move, when to speak and when to remain quiet, when to push and when to yield. And this yield is not surrender to defeat, it is surrender to wisdom. The river doesn't lose power by curving around the obstacle. It finds a way. It doesn't stop. It doesn't resist. It doesn't argue. It adapts. And in that adaptation, it remains true to its nature. It continues flowing, steady, clear, uninterrupted by the need to fight for space. That is the strength of yielding. Many people grow up believing that to be strong means to confront, to demand, to stand firm in all situations. But Buddhism points to a subtler power, the power that comes from not needing to win, from not seeing life as a battlefield, from choosing movement over resistance. And in that choice, suffering begins to unravel. The rock in your life could be anything: a person who refuses to understand you, a situation that feels unfair, a pattern that keeps returning. The reactive mind wants to smash against it, to force it to move. But the wiser path, the one that creates less pain, is to ask, how can I flow here? How can I respond without needing to confront? Flow doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means expressing them with wisdom. You don't need to shout your truth if your presence already speaks it. You don't need to overpower someone to protect your peace. You protect it by not handing it over in the first place. This is the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is immediate, tense, usually rooted in ego. It wants to win, to defend, but response is spacious. It listens, it watches, it waits until it sees the clearest path. And often, that path is not through the obstacle, but around it. The river doesn't waste energy trying to move what cannot be moved. It moves itself. It trusts its direction more than it fears the block. That is not weakness. That is mastery. The understanding that adaptation is not compromise, it's wisdom in motion. This also applies internally. The rocks inside you, those hard places, those habits of mind, those emotional triggers, you don't need to confront all of them at once. You don't need to break yourself apart to become whole. Sometimes the path forward is not digging deeper, but allowing yourself to move around what isn't ready to shift, to acknowledge the resistance without engaging it, to keep flowing in the direction of your peace. Adaptation, in this way, becomes a sacred act. It means you are listening to life instead of fighting it. You are no longer forcing outcomes, but moving with what arises. That doesn't mean giving up. It means being wise with your effort, using your energy where it matters, not trying to change what isn't yours to control. This is where so much of our suffering softens. When we stop trying to make people agree with us, when we stop trying to get closure from those who won't give it, when we stop forcing healing before it's time, we become like water, not because we have no direction, but because we've stopped wasting energy on things that do not move. And over time, that flow shapes everything. The hardest stone becomes smooth, not through force, but through time, through the consistency of contact, the quiet power of presence. That's what adaptation gives you, the ability to stay on your path without burning out, the ability to remain soft without becoming weak. This is the heart of skillful means. Not fixed rules, but flexible application. Responding to the moment as it is, not with what worked yesterday, not with what you wish were true, but with what is needed now. That requires presence, attention, humility, and the courage to move differently. You begin to notice how often confrontation is unnecessary, how many arguments could dissolve if just one person chose to listen without defensiveness, how much energy is spent proving what no one is asking you to prove, and how liberating it is to let all that go. This also transforms how you hold your own pain. You stop trying to fix every emotion the moment it arrives. You stop trying to be perfectly calm all the time. You start flowing with the inner weather instead of battling it. Sadness arises. You feel it. You breathe. You let it move through. You don't set up camp in it, but you don't push it out either. You adapt. And the more you do this, the more confidence grows. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs applause, but the kind that knows. I can handle this. I don't have to control everything to feel safe. I don't need everything to change for me to keep growing. I can move with life and let it shape me without breaking me. This is the power of non-confrontation. It gives you back your energy. It gives you back your peace. It teaches you to move without friction, to shift without losing center, to bend without losing spine. And this is not just personal, it's collective. Societies built on dominance and resistance burn out. But communities that learn how to adapt, how to listen, how to move with each other instead of against each other, those are the ones that endure. So tonight, think about what you've been pushing against, what you've been trying to change through pressure, through tension, through argument. Ask yourself, is there another way? Can I flow around this instead of smashing into it again? Can I protect my energy by moving with the truth instead of against it? Say to yourself, I don't need to fight to move forward. I don't need to control to stay strong. I can trust the flow of who I am. And then breathe into that. Let it soften what's still bracing inside you. Let the river keep moving. And after learning to move like the river, after flowing around the rock instead of colliding with it, there's something else that becomes clear. It isn't always the resistance in the world that wears you down. Sometimes it's the invisible need to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged for every thought, every truth, every effort. There's a quiet hunger inside that longs for others to understand, to validate, to echo back what you know within. But in Buddhist practice, one of the most powerful teachings comes in the gentlest form, the whisper that didn't demand to be heard. Not because it was unimportant, but because it no longer needed the world's agreement to remain at peace. This kind of silence is not suppression. It's not fear. It's not apathy. It's clarity. The understanding that truth doesn't gain value when others confirm it. That inner knowing doesn't become stronger through external echo. It becomes more stable when you stop needing anything from it. When it can speak softly inside you and remain enough. This lesson is often the hardest for the heart, especially for those who have spent a lifetime trying to prove themselves, who have shaped their voice to match the room, who have learned to speak louder when they feel invisible. But the Dharma shows another way, the way of silence that is not empty but complete, the way of power that doesn't push, doesn't argue, doesn't plead, the power that simply exists. This isn't about isolating yourself. It's about letting go of the craving for external reflection. Not because others don't matter, but because their understanding is not your oxygen. You begin to see how much energy is lost in trying to be understood by everyone. How many words are spent not out of sharing, but out of insecurity. And how quiet life becomes when you no longer chase after someone else's agreement. There is a deep strength in this, a freedom that comes when you realize you don't have to explain your every feeling, when your emotions don't need to be justified in someone else's language, when your boundaries don't need to be defended with long speeches. They simply are, and that's enough. The whisper is the moment when truth no longer needs an audience. It's not hidden. It's just not broadcast. It's sacred, not secret. It lives where clarity lives, in the space between the noise. And when you learn to stay with that whisper without trying to amplify it, you begin to feel something shift. The ego quiets. The soul settles. Silence becomes a teacher here. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of grounded presence. The kind of silence that listens more than it speaks. That notices without reacting. That sees the drama unfold and doesn't rush to join it. That holds space without trying to control it. You begin to notice how much of your communication was rooted in fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being dismissed. Fear of not being heard. And as that fear softens, your words become fewer, but heavier. Not because they carry weight, but because they no longer need to prove anything. This also shifts how you move through conflict. You stop needing the last word. You stop explaining to people who aren't listening. You stop pouring your truth into places that only echo back confusion. Instead, you allow silence to do its work. You let time teach what urgency cannot. There is a dignity in not defending yourself, in not forcing people to see your side, in allowing misunderstandings to float without needing to chase after them. That doesn't mean you allow disrespect, but it means you no longer tie your peace to someone else's perception of you. And this changes how you relate to your own inner world. You begin to sit with your thoughts without narrating them. You let feelings come and go without needing to tell a story around each one. You rest in the knowing that not every truth needs to be shared to be real. In meditation, this is why the silence matters so much. Not just the outer silence, but the inner one. The moment when you stop trying to organize your mind and simply let it be. Not controlling the thoughts, not suppressing them, just observing without needing to respond. And in that stillness, something else begins to emerge. Not a solution, but a deeper presence. This is what the whisper teaches. That presence is enough. That truth can live inside you without having to announce itself. That the deepest clarity often arrives when you stop talking long enough to feel it fully. And this doesn't make you invisible. It makes you rooted. People feel this difference. They feel when your peace doesn't depend on their approval. They feel when your silence holds substance, not avoidance. And often they lean in, not to fill the silence, but to understand it. You also begin to notice how much space opens up when you stop needing to narrate your life. How many moments become more vivid when you're not busy explaining them. How relationships deepen when you're not always trying to manage how you're perceived. This is not the silence of giving up. It's the silence of letting go, of realizing that not every truth needs to be argued into acceptance. Some truths become stronger when left alone, like fire that doesn't rage but smolders, steady, quiet, unstoppable. And in this quiet, you find yourself again, not the self you present to be accepted, but the self that exists beneath all performance, the one that doesn't need to be heard to feel whole, the one that no longer shouts because it finally feels safe to speak softly or not at all. So tonight, if there's something inside you that no one understands, let it be. Don't rush to explain. Don't demand to be seen. Just stay with it. Hold it like a whisper. Let it live inside you without needing to echo outside you. Say to yourself, I do not need to be understood to be at peace. My truth does not require volume. My clarity is not fragile. And then rest in that. Let the silence deepen. And when the whisper no longer needs to be heard, when truth rests inside you without seeking echo or explanation, something deeper begins to unravel. Not from outside pressure, not from the world changing, but from the inside loosening. You start to feel a tension that's been there for years begin to weaken. The grip that held you in place wasn't always visible, but it was always there. And now, with silence as your teacher and presence as your strength, you begin to see it clearly for what it is. Control. The rope that once seemed like safety, purpose, even identity, now revealing itself as the very thing that's kept you bound. Control is a quiet captor. It disguises itself as responsibility, as planning, as order. It offers the illusion of power, promising stability in an uncertain world. But beneath that promise is a tightening, a weight, a constant pressure to hold everything together. And over time, that pressure doesn't create freedom. It creates fatigue. It creates fear. It turns life into something that must be managed, fixed, and controlled rather than experienced and trusted. In Buddhist teachings, this is the root of clinging, not just to possessions or people, but to the belief that if we let go, we'll fall apart, that if we don't pull the rope tighter, everything will unravel. But the irony is, the rope was never keeping us safe. It was keeping us stuck. Every time we try to control how others see us, we tighten that rope. Every time we force a decision that isn't ready, speak a truth that isn't ripe, or cling to a plan that no longer fits, we're adding threads to the tension, not realizing that control, though it feels secure, is a kind of prison, not made of walls, but of habits, of old beliefs, of the fear that surrender means failure. But just like a rope wears over time, so too does our ability to keep pretending that control is working. We start to notice the fraying in our stress, in our impatience, in the sharp edges of our thoughts, in the way even joy starts to feel like something we're managing instead of feeling. That fraying isn't the beginning of chaos, it's the beginning of freedom. When a rope begins to unravel, it doesn't collapse all at once. It loosens, slowly, and so too must we. Control can't be cut abruptly without shocking the system. It must be unwoven, thread by thread. Awareness is the tool that does this. Each moment of noticing, I don't need to force this, I can let this go, I don't have to hold this together, is a thread released. The mind will resist at first, because control gave it identity. It was the one who kept things moving, who stayed responsible, who knew the next step. But the Dharma teaches a different kind of knowing, a knowing that does not control but trusts, that listens instead of plans, that watches instead of grasps. Control is reactive. Freedom is responsive. Control is rigid. Freedom is fluid. And as the rope unravels, what remains is not nothing. It's space. It's room to breathe. It's the part of you that was always waiting to move without chains. This applies even to the self. We don't just try to control the world, we try to control who we are. We hold ourselves to identities that no longer fit. We keep repeating stories that keep us small. We cling to the rope of "I'm this kind of person," not because it's true, but because it's familiar. But identity, like anything else, is meant to evolve. It is not fixed. It is not a contract. It is a river. And control is the dam that blocks it. When you begin to unravel the threads of identity, letting go of needing to be right, to be good, to be strong, to be perfect, you don't disappear. You return. You return to the part of you that existed before the rope, before the roles, before the pressure. This unraveling also teaches compassion, because when you no longer grip your own story so tightly, you stop demanding others grip theirs. You allow people to change, to grow, to fall apart and come back differently. You stop needing them to fit your expectations because you're no longer trying to fit your own. And the world becomes softer. Not because it changes, but because you've stopped trying to hold it still. You begin to see beauty in its movement, in its uncertainty, in the way it refuses to be tamed. That refusal used to scare you. Now it feels like truth. You learn to meet life with open hands, to let the rope fall from your fingers. Not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. To the truth that control was never peace. It was never safety. It was the armor that kept love out, kept joy small, kept you distant from the softness of the moment. As you unweave the rope, you rediscover choice. Not the illusion of control, but real, grounded choice. The ability to move with intention instead of reaction, to respond to the moment instead of rewriting it, to act from presence, not from habit. And that's when liberation begins to feel less like a concept and more like a body sensation, less like a goal and more like a return. Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, your mind stops racing ahead. You're not waiting for peace anymore, you're living it. You're no longer tangled in the fight to be enough. You already are. You're no longer clutching your life into shape. You're shaping it gently, with care, not control. You begin to trust that what falls apart was never yours to hold, and what stays, stays freely. This kind of freedom doesn't make you reckless, it makes you respectful. You treat life as something to be touched, not gripped. You meet others with openness, not strategy. You lead yourself with curiosity, not fear. You begin to feel like the truest version of yourself, the one who doesn't need to hold everything together in order to be whole. So tonight, feel for the rope. Where is it still tight? What are you still gripping? What are you trying to hold up that may not need to be held anymore? Don't force it loose. Just breathe. Look at it. Let it speak. Say to yourself, I do not need to bind myself to be safe. I do not need to grip to be worthy. I can let this thread fall, and I will still be here. And then let the next thread fall, and the next, until what remains is not a rope, but a truth. You were never the knot. You were always the space around it. And once the rope has fallen away, once the grip has loosened and the threads of control have unraveled, what you're left holding isn't tension anymore. It's space. But in that space, a question rises that's quieter and more unsettling than the rest. If I am not the one who held it all together, who am I? If I'm not the person bound to the image I've spent so long protecting, then what remains? That question is the doorway to one of the most profound Buddhist truths, that the self we work so hard to define, manage, and protect might not be what we think, that it might be more mirror than substance, something that reflects what passes through, but never holds on to it. And this is where the mirror that refused to hold the reflection becomes your teacher. In Buddhism, this teaching is called anatta, no self. It does not mean you do not exist. It means the fixed identity you keep trying to maintain is not what you truly are. The voice in your head saying, "This is me," the image you present to the world, the personality traits you think define you, all of that is in constant motion. And yet we suffer when we try to freeze those images, when we try to hold the reflection still. The mirror shows what's there, but it doesn't cling to it. It reflects, but it doesn't absorb. And when you begin to see yourself like this, something inside you begins to soften. The constant need to control how you're seen, how you appear, how consistent your identity looks to the world, it all starts to fall away. Not because you've lost who you are, but because you've stopped needing to prove it. This detachment from identity is not disconnection. It's freedom. It allows you to meet each moment as something new, not as someone defined by the past, not as a person boxed in by their own labels, but as awareness itself, open and shifting with the world, no longer chained to a reflection that was never meant to be permanent. Think of how often you defend yourself, not from danger, but from someone misunderstanding who you are. Think of the energy spent maintaining the version of yourself you've created in your mind. You say, "I'm this kind of person," and then build your decisions around that image. But what happens when that image no longer fits? When life asks you to become something else, to change, to evolve? The suffering comes from trying to protect the reflection when the mirror is asking you to let it go. This happens in subtle ways. You feel anger and you say, "But I'm not an angry person." You feel doubt and you say, "But I'm supposed to be confident." And so the inner conflict begins, not between right and wrong, but between who you think you should be and who you are in that moment. But the mirror has no such argument. It simply shows what is, and then it lets it pass. To live like the mirror is to allow the self to breathe, to let it be dynamic, to stop gripping your traits like proof of stability, to see that what you call you is just a series of impressions, memories, preferences, habits, none of which stay the same. And yet, awareness itself does not vanish. The mirror remains, even as every image fades. This teaching unravels the root of so much control. Because the deepest control is not over others, it's over the self. The need to appear consistent, the fear of being exposed, the desperation to fix any moment that doesn't align with the identity you've worked so hard to maintain. But what if the real you is not that fixed image, but the space that watches it change. This is why meditation can feel unsettling at first, because when you sit long enough, the personality begins to dissolve, the thoughts quiet, the roles fade, and you start to see that behind it all is just presence, empty, clear, alert, not a void, but not a person either, just awareness, open to everything, attached to nothing. From that space, compassion flows more easily, because you no longer need to prove anything. You no longer feel separate from others. You see that just as you are not fixed, neither are they. Their anger is not who they are. Their words are not their core. You stop taking everything personally because there's no fixed person to protect. You also stop chasing validation, because who is it that needs to be validated if the self is only a reflection? The image, the role, the opinion. When you realize none of those are permanent, the urgency drops. You stop trying to be impressive. You stop trying to defend your worth. You simply exist, moment to moment, allowing the mirror to reflect and release. This awareness also dissolves shame, because shame is often the result of believing that one moment defines you, that one mistake becomes your identity. But when you see the self as fluid, that moment loses its power. It becomes something that passed through, not something that stuck. And you're left with the truth. You are not your reflection. You are the clarity that sees it come and go. And what about goals, purpose, growth? They still matter, but they're no longer tied to ego. You grow because it feels right, not because you need to become someone more acceptable. You aim higher because it serves life, not because it fixes a broken image. Your path becomes more honest, more responsive, less burdened by who you're trying to become, and more rooted in what's true right now. Relationships change too. You stop expecting people to reflect back the image you want to see. You give them space to change, just as you're learning to do for yourself. You begin to love people for their essence, not for how well they mirror you. And in return, you stop feeling the need to shrink or bend to reflect what they expect. This all begins with the smallest awareness. The moment you catch yourself saying, "This isn't me," and instead of defending that image, you pause. You ask, "Who is me right now?" You let the answer change. And in that flexibility, peace enters, the control drops, the identity loosens, the mirror clears. So tonight, let the reflection go. Don't fight to hold it in place. Don't panic as it shifts. Just notice it. See how it moves. See how it dissolves. And then return, not to the image, but to the space behind it. Say to yourself, "I am not what I see. I am the one who sees. I am not the reflection. I am the mirror." And in that space, feel the freedom. Feel the relief of no longer needing to hold anything still. And when the mirror no longer holds the reflection, when identity is no longer a fixed shape but a passing image, what arises next is the energy that was trapped inside that shape, the emotions that once had to fit the mold, the anger that had to be hidden, the sadness that had to be justified, the passion that had to be managed. Now, without the rigid structure of "this is who I must be," those emotions have space. But space alone is not enough. What you do with that space matters, because emotional energy doesn't need to be extinguished. It needs to be transformed. Like fire that warms without burning, This is the art of letting go, not by suppression, but through redirection. Emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. But when you try to control them, when you suppress them in order to protect your image or to avoid discomfort, they don't disappear. They go underground. They seep into the body. They rise in unexpected moments. They turn into anxiety, irritation, fatigue, not because they are dangerous, but because they have been denied the chance to move. Fire becomes destructive when trapped, but when given space, it gives light. It provides heat. It becomes useful. The Buddhist path does not ask you to be emotionless. It asks you to be intimate with what arises, to be aware of the sensations, the pull, the energy behind each emotion, not to act on it blindly and not to bury it, but to witness it fully. That witnessing changes everything. Because the moment you stop trying to fight the fire or run from it, you learn how to tend it. Like a monk tending the flame at a shrine, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Take anger, for example. It's not wrong, it's not weakness. It often carries valuable information about boundaries, about injustice, about care. But when it becomes entangled with ego, when it becomes an identity or a weapon, it burns everything. The practice isn't to kill the anger, it's to sit with it long enough to hear what it's trying to say, and then to decide with clarity how to use that energy. Maybe it becomes a boundary, maybe it becomes a conversation, maybe it becomes action, but it's no longer fire thrown wildly, it's heat directed wisely. The same is true for grief. When grief is resisted, it becomes heaviness. When it's hidden, it becomes numbness. But when it's allowed to move, when it's felt without shame, it opens the heart. It softens the edges. It connects you to compassion, not just for your own pain, but for the shared experience of all beings. It no longer consumes you. It warms you from the inside. It becomes fuel for empathy. Even joy can burn when it's clung to. When you try to hold on to it, to make it last longer than it's meant to, it turns into anxiety. The fear of losing it becomes stronger than the joy itself. But when you let joy flow, when you meet it fully without gripping, it becomes a gentle flame, one that dances lightly in your presence without needing to be owned. This is the heart of redirection. You're not suppressing the fire, you're turning it into something else, not by effort, but by awareness. Awareness is the container. It holds the emotion without letting it take over. It sees the rise of the flame and knows how to keep it from spreading out of control. And over time, you begin to feel safer inside yourself, not because you've eliminated difficult emotions, but because you've learned how to carry them with wisdom. This changes how you move through the world. You no longer explode, you no longer implode, you express. But that expression is not loud unless it needs to be. It's not silent unless silence is true. You stop being reactive and start becoming responsive. You act from clarity, not from habit. And this also means you stop fearing your emotional intensity. Some people are wired with deep emotional energy. This isn't a flaw, it's a gift. But if you try to control it, to mute it, it will turn inward. It will drain you. Instead, the path is to learn how to channel it. Like fire through a forge, it can shape steel, create tools, forge art, but only if it is tended. Meditation helps with this, not because it eliminates emotion, but because it trains the mind to watch it, to stay with it, to feel the heat rising and not panic, to say, "This too is part of the path," and to breathe with it until the mind becomes still enough to understand its direction. And in everyday life, this shows up in small moments. You feel irritation during a conversation. Instead of snapping, you pause. You breathe. You notice the heat. You name it softly. Frustration. You don't fight it. You don't feed it. You simply feel it. And then you choose what to say. The fire stays contained, but its warmth shapes your response. Maybe that warmth is honesty. Maybe it's patience, but it's no longer reactive. It's deliberate. It's clean. This practice also brings forgiveness, because when you learn to hold your own emotional storms without judgment, you begin to hold others with the same compassion. You see that everyone is carrying their own fire. Some are burning quietly, others are consumed. And your job is not to extinguish their flame. It's to be steady in your own, to be a safe presence, a warm light, a reminder that intensity doesn't have to mean destruction. Even when emotions are overwhelming, the teaching remains the same. Stay. Don't fix right away. Don't label. Don't escape. Just stay. Let the energy move. Let it speak. And when it softens, and it always softens, you'll find something new beneath it. A message, a truth, a clarity. And then you act, not from the heat, but from the wisdom that rose through it. This is how emotional energy becomes sacred, not by avoiding it, not by drowning in it, but by learning how to carry it with presence. Fire becomes warmth, anger becomes clarity, grief becomes compassion, joy becomes gratitude, and you become the one who holds it all, not with fear, but with reverence. So tonight, feel what's rising in you, not to control it, not to suppress it, but to see it clearly. Let the fire burn, not to destroy, but to illuminate. Let it show you what needs attention, what needs love, what needs space. Say to yourself, "I do not need to put out the fire. I only need to stay close enough to understand it. My emotions are not the enemy. They are energy, waiting to be guided." And then breathe. Let the flame soften. Let the warmth return. And once the fire has warmed without burning, once emotional energy is no longer something to suppress, but something to understand, you begin to see the walls you built around yourself for what they truly are. Not strength, not safety, but tension, the invisible pressure of always trying to shield your inner world from unpredictability. All those guarded decisions, all those careful calculations, the mental effort it takes to close every door to uncertainty. It feels like protection, but it's exhaustion. And now, a new question rises from that heat. What if you stopped trying to close the gate? What if you let it stand open, not as an invitation to harm, but as a sign of trust? The illusion that control creates safety is one of the most persistent patterns in the mind. It teaches you to lock things down, to manage every outcome, to plan for every threat. But this approach treats life as a threat in itself. It assumes the world is hostile and you are alone. And over time, the gate you close to protect yourself starts keeping peace out as well, not just pain. Buddhist practice asks something radical. It asks you to stop defending and start noticing, to stop reacting to fear and begin understanding its source. Because fear doesn't come from what might happen. It comes from believing you can't meet it if it does, and so the gate stays closed, tightly, rigidly, silently. But real strength is not in how many locks you fasten. It's in the willingness to open, not recklessly, not naively, but with awareness, with full presence, the kind of openness that says, I will not try to manage every variable. I will not organize my life into a fortress. I will meet what comes, and I will trust what stays. This shift feels strange at first, because we've been taught that control equals power, that caution equals wisdom, that planning every outcome is the smart thing to do. But what if that control is what's keeping life from reaching you? What if caution has turned into hesitation and planning into paralysis? The gate that stands open is not weak. It is deeply rooted in clarity. It is the result of seeing that your inner peace is not at risk just because the world is unpredictable, that your heart does not need to be behind walls to remain safe. That openness can be the foundation of the strongest kind of presence. Openness allows life to move freely. It makes space for connection. It allows unexpected beauty. It lets in the moments that control would have missed. And it teaches you that trust is not something you wait to feel. It's something you choose to practice. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped needing to brace for the worst. To open the gate doesn't mean you never say no. It means your no comes from awareness, not from fear. It means you can walk away when something doesn't feel right, but you don't do it because you're afraid of discomfort. You do it because you're aligned with what matters. Your boundaries become cleaner, not walls, but lines of clarity. This kind of strength becomes evident in small moments. When you stop over-explaining, when you stop rehearsing every conversation, when you stop editing your truth to keep others comfortable. These acts of openness require courage because they risk being misunderstood, but they also create space for something real to emerge. And with that space comes relief. The mental load of control begins to lift. The constant monitoring, adjusting, preparing, it fades. You start to see how much effort went into keeping the gate closed and how little peace it actually brought. You start to realize that most of your safety came not from control, but from presence, from knowing you can meet life without hiding from it. The open gate also transforms relationships. When you stop trying to control how others see you, how they react, how they behave, you begin to meet them as they are, not as projections of your fear. You become less reactive, less defensive, and ironically, more secure. Because you're no longer trying to manage everything. They are. You are just being. This openness is not the absence of care. It is care without panic. It's the decision to stay soft in a world that tells you to harden. It's the strength to be transparent, even when you could hide. It's the willingness to let things be what they are, rather than what you think they should be. Buddhism teaches this through the heart practices: metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. All of these require openness. You cannot love fully with a closed heart. You cannot feel joy for others while calculating your own safety. You cannot be at peace while controlling every outcome. The gate that stands open is the one that trusts itself. It doesn't fear the world because it no longer believes the world defines its worth. It doesn't hide because it no longer believes vulnerability is a threat. It knows pain may still come, but it also knows that trying to avoid it often brings more suffering than pain itself. So what happens when you open? You begin to feel, not just emotion, but aliveness. You begin to reconnect with the parts of you that had been quiet for too long. Creativity, spontaneity, play, the ability to move through life without second-guessing every step. You begin to feel the difference between living and managing, and when fear arises again, as it will, you don't shame yourself for it. You welcome it. You listen. You let it speak. But you no longer let it lock the gate. You thank it for its concern, and you move forward anyway. That is the heart of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to open anyway. So tonight, ask yourself, what are you still protecting? What gate is still closed? Not because it must be, but because you forgot it could open. Don't force it. Just feel it. Let it be seen. Say to yourself, I am not safer behind the gate. I am stronger when I open. I trust what comes. I release what leaves. I remain whole. And with that, let the gate stand open. And once the gate stands open, once the walls are lowered, not out of recklessness, but from trust, what becomes visible is what flows through. Not everything that enters will remain. Not everything that remains will return. Some moments come only to pass. Some people arrive only to teach. Some experiences exist only to move. But the mind, still shaped by old patterns, still wants to hold. It wants to grasp every joy, every connection, every version of life, and say, stay. And this is where the next teaching begins. Not in fighting for permanence, but in surrendering to impermanence. Not in clinging, but in trusting the departure. Like sand that slips willingly through the fingers, not lost, not wasted, but returned. This kind of release is not passive, it's intentional. It's the recognition that what comes into your life is not meant to be owned. It's meant to be experienced. And when its time is done, letting it go is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of understanding. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering. Not because loss is inherently painful, but because resistance to loss multiplies the pain. We suffer not only when things end, but when we demand they last forever. We grieve not just the change, but our inability to stop it. But nothing truly stays, not in the way we want it to. The breath leaves, the seasons shift, the people we love grow, change, leave, or die. Our own identity morphs over time, shedding and reforming. And the more tightly we grip what is trying to pass through us, the more tension we carry. Trying to hold sand only makes it slip faster. This doesn't mean we stop loving. It means we stop confusing love with possession. True love allows things to move. It doesn't hold by force. It doesn't anchor with fear. It opens the hand and says, "Thank you for being here," even as the goodbye begins to form. This kind of release doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds. First, you notice the grip. Then you soften it. Then you breathe through the emptiness. And slowly, you begin to see that the space left behind isn't loss. It's clarity. The sand didn't vanish. It returned to the earth. What was never yours to hold is finally free, and so are you. Trusting what leaves means seeing movement as part of the design. It means honoring the impermanence instead of resisting it. Every sunset is a letting go. Every exhale is a release. Every goodbye, a reminder that we are not here to collect and keep, but to touch and release. And this applies not just to relationships or possessions, but to emotions, thoughts, seasons of life. You may have carried a version of yourself that no longer fits, an ambition that once drove you but now feels hollow, a belief that once protected you but now restricts. These too must be allowed to slip away. To release without mourning doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you allow the grief to pass through without making it permanent. You let the tears fall, but you don't turn them into chains. You sit with the ache, but you don't wear it like a name. You allow the moment to complete itself without clinging to the feeling it left behind. This is where peace lives, not in the absence of change, but in the presence of trust. Trust that life knows what it's doing, that what leaves makes space for what is next, that every exit is also an entrance to something unseen. This doesn't make the process easy. Some goodbyes are soft, others break you. But even the heartbreak carries a teaching that your heart can break and still remain whole. That loss is not the end of love. It's part of how love teaches depth. Over time, you begin to see that the less you try to hold on to, the more free you feel, the lighter you become, not empty, clear, not detached, deeply present. And in that presence, you start to notice beauty you missed while holding on, the way the wind touches your skin, the way silence wraps around you when the noise is gone, the way letting go makes room for breath. This lesson transforms how you relate to life. You stop rushing to secure outcomes. You stop trying to freeze time. You begin to participate instead of possess. You touch moments fully without needing them to last. You give your love completely without needing it to stay. And the irony is, the more you live this way, the more connected you feel. Not because you've captured anything, but because you're no longer afraid to lose it. You experience the fullness of now, not through grip, but through presence. So many people live in mourning, not just for what's gone, but for what they fear will leave. Anticipating loss, bracing for it, living half present in a moment they're already trying to hold on to. But that grip is the source of so much sorrow. It blinds you to the joy that's still here. It turns love into anxiety. It turns peace into a project. But when you allow the sand to slip, you meet what's real. You feel what's still with you. You honor what has passed. And you welcome what comes next, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. Tonight, notice what you're still holding, not with judgment, with kindness. What are you afraid to lose? What are you still gripping, even gently? Say to yourself, if it's meant to go, I won't make it stay. If it's meant to stay, I won't push it away. I will love fully, and I will release freely. Then open your hand. Let the sand fall. And once the sand slips through without resistance, once what leaves is not mourned but honored, the space it leaves behind becomes something rare, something unfamiliar to a mind used to movement, explanation, defense. That space, when no longer filled with grasping, begins to speak, but not with words, not with more effort. It speaks through what remains when everything else quiets. This is where the real shift begins, not with a reaction, not with a plan, but with the silence that finally answers the noise. Stillness in Buddhist practice is not passive. It is not the absence of sound, thought, or emotion. It is the deliberate resting of the mind's impulse to react. It is the place beyond inner argument, beyond the tug-of-war with life, where the storm of mental commentary slows, not because you forced it, but because you stepped out of its way. Stillness doesn't stop life. It stops the illusion that you must constantly respond to it. The noise, for many, becomes the default, the commentary, the worry, the mental rehearsals, the imagined futures and replayed pasts. The mind builds walls of sound, and in the middle of it all, we believe we are those sounds, that we are the fear, the anger, the planning, the memory. But Buddhist practice teaches that we are not the noise. We are the awareness that notices it, and that awareness becomes strongest in silence. Not a silence of avoidance, a silence of presence. When the breath is slow, when the body softens, when the mind is no longer trying to win, impress, justify, or control. That kind of silence is not emptiness. It is fullness without clutter. Non-reaction is one of the most radical teachings of the path, because it breaks the pattern the mind has built for survival, that everything must be answered, every insult must be defended, every discomfort must be solved, every uncertainty must be resolved. But in stillness, the truth becomes clear. Not every thought needs your attention. Not every feeling needs your comment. Not every moment needs your intervention. This doesn't mean you become indifferent. It means you become discerning. You see the noise rise, and instead of grabbing it, you watch it. You let it play out. And something powerful happens. The noise begins to dissolve. Not because it was defeated, but because it was no longer fed. Reaction feeds noise. Silence starves it. Stillness teaches that not responding is a response, and often it's the most intelligent one. When the world is pulling you in 1,000 directions, the wisest choice may be to sit, to breathe, to not move until movement is true. Not every urgency is yours to absorb. Not every call is meant to be answered. Not every pressure needs your energy. Meditative stillness is not just for the cushion. It's a way of being, a way of carrying yourself in the middle of chaos without becoming chaotic. You learn to listen without agreeing, to feel without becoming overwhelmed, to notice your triggers without obeying them. The silence becomes your guide, not as a retreat, but as clarity. It's in this silence that resistance begins to fade, not by being pushed out, but by being seen for what it is, unnecessary. Most resistance is born from fear. Fear of what a moment means, fear of how something will end. But when you sit in silence and do nothing but observe, you begin to notice. The moment doesn't break you. The discomfort passes. The fear softens. Not because you changed anything, but because you didn't feed the resistance. The mind wants to fix, to control, to push. But silence teaches a different way, a deeper wisdom, the kind that says, let it come, let it go, you do not have to chase it. That is the beginning of peace, Not because life is quiet, but because you are. Stillness brings depth. What once felt overwhelming now feels distant, not removed, but spacious. You start to see how much of what you feared was just a wave you didn't know how to watch. How much of your stress was reaction to reaction, layers of judgment, opinion, story, all unraveling the moment you no longer participate. This also transforms how you speak. When silence is your baseline, your words become cleaner, less defensive, less performative. You speak only when something real needs to be said, and when it's better not to speak, you're at ease with that too. There's no urge to fill space. You've made peace with the space, and the silence begins to speak back. It gives insights, not in loud epiphanies, but in soft realizations. Clarity appears not because you chased it, but because you made room for it, like muddy water settling when left alone, like a knot loosening on its own once the pulling stops. You learn to trust the quiet, to respect it, to find comfort in it, and in doing so, you stop trying to manufacture peace. You start living in it, because peace isn't created, it's uncovered. It's revealed when the noise is no longer in the way. This kind of stillness doesn't require you to stop life. It asks you to stop believing that every emotion is a call to action, that every thought deserves a stage, that every feeling means you're broken. It invites you to sit, to breathe, and to remember. Awareness doesn't need noise to be aware. Truth doesn't need force to be known. This practice becomes a refuge. When the world rises loud, when the mind spins, when others try to pull you into their storm, you return to silence, to the breath, to the space behind all of it. And from there, you choose, not react. From there, you respond, not defend. From there, you live, not survive. So tonight, let the noise be there. Don't fight it. Don't fix it. Don't follow it. Let it rise. Let it pass. And notice what remains. Say to yourself, I don't need to answer every voice. I don't need to fix every feeling. I can rest in the silence. I can let the noise fall away. And then breathe and wait. The stillness is already here. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means giving yourself back. Over these sacred hours, we've walked through still waters and frayed ropes, through quiet whispers and burning fires, through gates that stood open and mirrors that no longer held us captive. We've met silence not as emptiness, but as healing. And what we've uncovered through each breath, each image, each surrender is something deeper than control, something softer and more powerful. Freedom. The freedom to not chase what's fading. The freedom to be still while the world spins. The freedom to stop holding your breath, waiting for things to go your way. You've seen now that what slips away makes room. That silence answers what noise never could. That peace isn't won, it's revealed the moment you stop trying to manage what was never yours. So, as you drift into sleep tonight, carry this with you. Not everything must be understood. Not everything must be fixed. And nothing, absolutely nothing, needs to be held tighter in order for you to be whole. You were already enough before the grasping began, and you are even more so now with open hands. If something in these teachings touched you tonight, if a single phrase helped you breathe easier or release a little more, share it in the comments below. Let someone else know what whispered to your heart. Because what we release alone, we often confirm together. And if this kind of peace is something you want more of in your life, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss the next step on this path. Let these teachings meet you again and again whenever you need them most. You've done enough for now. Let go, rest deeply, and let the Dharma carry you through the night.